Hello, everyone. It is time to roll for combat. I'm Mark Seifter, the director of game design here at Roll for Combat, and we have on two guests today, and zero
Live in
Stevens
Maryland, you're
and zero
definitely-
Dereks. So why don't you introduce yourselves, everybody? We'll start with Discourse because you are alphabetically first, and therefore you appear.
Yes, it's logical. It's logical. I'm Discourse from Dungeons and Discourse. I have a YouTube channel called Dungeons and Discourse where I talk about RPGs and Dungeons and Dragons, but I also have a channel called Discourse Minis where I talk about miniature war games and Warhammer. So this is kind of like the confluence of two very interesting topics for me personally.
All
Gotta
right.
want to hear this. If
How
you've
about
been
Jess?
interested in a
Yes, hello. I am Jess. I am a game designer, a magical freelancer, if you will. I mainly write for Paizo on the Pathfinder and Starfinder RPGs.
All right, so today we're here to talk about what Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role-playing games can learn from miniatures war games such as Warhammer in terms specifically of the physical market, the way that that things are changing towards digital in tabletop role-playing games that Steven constantly says on every episode. Now, you may have seen a thumbnail or a title that says the controversy, and really, is there a controversy? I think that is the real controversy is whether there's a controversy or not. I'm pretty perplexed by that. When we were all told about what the topic would be, it would be that thing I just said. And so that's what we're going to be talking about here today. I'd say the real controversy is just like, can we find a controversy?
Yeah, very
Yes.
much. And at the end of the episode, if we haven't succeeded to find a controversy, you can hold Steven to account next week for the title of this.
There we go.
Stream.
Well, Kurth in chat
Look,
said this thumbnail is a level of clickbait that Discourse would approve.
Yes, yeah, I do approve. I do approve of it because I can give you a controversy.
All
I
right.
think it is kind of controversial, honestly. The idea that Dungeons and Dragons has much to learn from Warhammer. I would disagree actually, because I think the premise of today is that Warhammer is successful right now. It's making a lot of money. It's kind of blowing up, I think. For me, it's kind of weird because I've lived in the UK, so I've always known about Warhammer. Like I grew up with it in my local, like I walked past the Games Workshop store in the street. Since I was a young kid, I've always been around Warhammer. But I think America, it's really coming to America in a big way. And this has ballooned up like a ton of profits for them. Like we constantly hear about Warhammer blowing up. It's got new like TV shows on like Amazon. It's got the Henry Cavill stuff coming out. Like everybody is going crazy for it. And that's kind of alongside Dungeons and Dragons feels like it's on a little bit of a downturn right now. Not only in terms of like, we maybe had back in the 2010s, big things like Stranger Things, Critical Role was blowing up. Everybody was learning about Dungeons and Dragons. Well, now everyone's learned about it, and it kind of feels like it's going downwards. So as one goes down, the other one's going up. The thing is, Dungeons and Dragons has never made a crazy amount of money, and certainly could never make as much money as Warhammer is making, because Warhammer is a physical product that is collectible to an extent, and that has a very dedicated group of people who are willing to constantly buy new releases. And it uses a ton of different business practices that I don't agree with. So there are some things I think that Hasbro could learn from Games Workshop who run Warhammer, yes, but some of those practices are kind of evil.
So
I don't
there
know
are
if I
things
would
they
want
could
that.
learn, but
I
that you
don't want
hope
them
that
to.
they won't learn.
I hope they don't. I hope
So,
they don't. Yeah.
Hasbro,
Yeah.
if you're watching this video, stop now and don't
Stop.
learn some of the
Yeah.
things that Discourse doesn't want you to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Because so one of the things is the Games Workshop's business model has changed. It used to be all about getting younger kids into the kind of hobby, as they would call it, right? As part of the wargaming hobby, the miniature collecting hobby. They used to get kids into it. Whenever I was growing up, it would be all about they try and get kids in, get them when they're young. Good business model. Good business model. Stood the test of time. And they would try to get kids like buying minis, from a very, very early age. They try to get parents to buy them for Christmas, and then that would kind of enmesh them in the culture of playing war games, right? You go down to your local store and you would play games physically there with other people, and it kind of had like a club feel. And actually, this is alongside, there used to be a lot of community centers in the UK where people would go to these community centers and play war games there. And that has kind of changed a little. Now everything's happening at stores in these kind of commercialized spaces. But that was their business model. That's not their business model anymore. In the 2010s, Games Workshop almost went bankrupt. They almost collapsed completely because they weren't getting newer, younger people into the hobby. People weren't coming into the hobby. And so they were left with this huge gap, and they realized that actually they were screwed. But then 2020 comes around. All the 30-year-olds are like, do you know what I loved when I was younger? I loved Warhammer. And now you've got these adults who are getting into Warhammer and spending a lot of money. And the actual profit coming from wargamers, it's a small minority of players who are spending most of the money, who are spending lots of money on these big limited edition bundle boxes. They're buying every single miniature as it comes out. And Games Workshop produce fear of missing out practices, right? They do lots of limited edition runs. They sell big bundles of miniatures. They're constantly raising the price, trying to turn up the temperature. I mean, it's wheels, really. I don't mean that in a sort of pejorative way, but they're these small, big spender people. Now, that's not people with a lot of disposable income necessarily. That's people who are just predisposed to spend a lot of money on Warhammer. That doesn't mean that they're like wealthy people. They're just spending a lot of money on Warhammer. And I would worry, the thing I love about Dungeons and Dragons, the thing I love about RPG is that one person can buy a book. And everybody with their imagination can sit at a table and play a game. You cannot do that with Warhammer, right? Not at a tournament, not at a, not in a game store. You maybe could have done that at a community center like 20 years ago, but you can't do that in a game store. You got to buy the miniatures. You got to buy in, and they're very expensive. And lots of people are locked out. I think long-term, Warhammer might have a little bit of a demographics problem, but right now, I really hope that Dungeons & Dragons never becomes as exclusive as something like Warhammer.
The thing about the cost of Warhammer is that, like, people can have one main thing where a lot of their disposable income goes. Maybe they smoke cigarettes. Maybe they go to the bars and buy drinks at the bar. The Warhammer people, their thing is that they play Warhammer. Like, you can't be buying cigarettes and Warhammer both. Like, it's just Warhammer. You can't. There's no space for it. Whereas
you could resort
D&D,
to a life of crime.
Yeah.
Okay.
But like D&D has been targeting the mainstream recently, I feel like. And so a lot of the people who are buying D&D are people who like also spend their money on going out to the bars and drinking with their friends or on weed or whatever, right? They're not people who are going to dedicate all of their disposable income to this one singular hobby.
So
Yes.
do you think that means Warhammer should market themselves to parents and be like, hey, parents, you don't want your kids to grow up to spend their disposable income on cigarettes or alcohol or pot.
Yes.
Why not Warhammer miniatures?
Yeah, that's what they did. They used to do that all the time in the 90s. They had adverts in the UK that was like, do you know where your kids are? They're in the Warhammer store. Because where else are they going, right? Yeah, like that 100%. And honestly, I think they should do that. Like, I think I love analog gaming. And I think that as we digitize a lot of our own time and our own spaces, it's really nice to have analog games, to have these physical things that we interact with, that we are physically in the same space, that we can kind of converse, that we can socialize with each other. And we're losing that, right? We're losing these kind of third spaces where we can just interact with each other with an activity. And I think that that's what's great about D&D. I think that's what's great about RPGs. And I think that's what's great about war games as well.
That makes sense.
A lot of people very often will say things like Critical Role is responsible for bringing new players into Dungeons and Dragons. Is this actually true though? Because I don't play Warhammer. I'm a little bit on the outside of the Warhammer space, but my perception is that they had the opportunity to have like their Critical Role in Does the Emperor Have a Text to Speech, and they squashed it. Was that like actually a good business move overall? Because like they're the ones making the money, but they did have their opportunity to have their Critical Role, and they made sure it stopped.
So Games Workshop have always been really restrictive of their IP, right? Because they realized from a very beginning, this is something Hasbro don't have. There's a Games Workshop realized that their actual product is their IP. It's their intellectual property. They understand that the Warhammer setting is really interesting, really compelling, and really cool. And so they don't want anybody fucking with it at all.
Yeah.
So they're very happy to like squash down on fan projects and to kind of crush anybody that they don't think is working with their IP in a right way. Of course, they'll still sell the IP to like lots of mobile game companies. You know, they'll still take punts on that. They
Those
don't care
are the
about
right
that. 'Cause
people.
that-
Those are the
yeah,
right
that's gonna make
people.
licensing money back. You know, like.
Yeah.
Whereas the problem that Hasbro have always had, I think, is that no one cared. Okay, I don't know what the number is. Maybe in chat, everybody let me know. But I would suggest that the vast majority of people who play Dungeons and Dragons and every other RPG, honestly, play in their own setting, right? It might be based vaguely on the official setting or like the IP, but most people have their own kind of context, their own little world that they're working in. They've got their heroes who are the players at the table. They're working on that kind of IP. Warhammer doesn't have that. Warhammer these days is a more competitive game where you play in the sandbox created by Games Workshop. And Games Workshop make a lot of money on novels, and they make a lot of money selling stories set in the Warhammer world. But not so much Hasbro anymore, right? There used to be novels and stuff, but honestly, that was never a big part of RPG culture where I'm from.
Yeah.
Oh, so I didn't hit it, but there was a super chat that said from Mark T that Jess is the best guest.
Oh. All guests are good, and all guests have their niches that they fill. And I have the niche that I fill, which is not being a professional at streaming and constantly interrupting or talking at times when there's like too much or too little of a gap in time between me and someone else. That's what I bring to the stream.
Or at least that's what people say sometimes in the comments.
Well, it's not untrue. I'm not going to pretend that it's untrue.
All right, I've started a poll for people to say if they care about the D&D official setting. Also, it looks like Thirsty from Paizo is over here, who said this is an odd intersection of my interests.
Yes, Thirsty has been playing Warhammer for a long time, and also was I'm gonna dox you here. Was briefly involved in a 40K actual play before they had to pivot.
Oh, awesome. So, funnily enough, like that's how I got into RPGs. I got in through Warhammer. So I played Warhammer and then played Dark Heresy, which is like the Warhammer 40K TTRPG. And I played that long before I played any Dungeons and Dragons or anything at all. So, or Pathfinder.
Yeah, Thirsty was doing Warhams before they had to switch to Rot Grind and play Pathfinder.
Absolutely.
Well, so I think though, what's really interesting is about, because I'm just looking at the poll here, but do you care about the D&D official setting? Is that
And we got about 70% of people who don't. Now, this is people who tuned in live for a video that claimed it was that like things that like D&D could learn from Warhammer, which I'm going to assume is a higher percentage than usual for our viewers of people who are like Warhammer or into Warhammer and want to see it take the W a little bit. And therefore, they may not even play D&D as much as our usual viewers do. And therefore be like, care about the official setting? I'm not even here for that game at all. But
yeah, that's fair.
Even that being said, that's a pretty high percentage that say they do not care, especially since on a lot of episodes in the past, we've talked about the fact that the Wizards is trying to cash in on nostalgia for the official setting. They've really dug in on normally you wouldn't use proper nouns in your books because you'd be afraid that would scare people off with a weird name that nobody's ever heard of. But they have done that pretty consistently for this edition, where they'll throw in the name of a character from the official setting. So I personally don't think that this survey is really scientific at all of the wider market, and that obviously Hasbro has way better tools to figure out what that is or not. Plus, they may not care about the 70, because Discourse said for Warhammer, who do they care about? Maybe they want those whale type folks who are the same ones who you said came back to Warhammer, they loved the settings of their childhood, and now they're in their 30s. Well, you have people who are now in their whatever age they are, who think back to their childhood and want to buy D&D. Maybe that's who they're trying to target anyway. Maybe they don't care if it's 70-30. Maybe they think that's right, but the 70 don't care that much that it's there, and the 30 will be really happy.
Yeah. The other thing is that if you're going to release a setting book, it's not going to only be the people who actually want to play that setting who buy it. People who make their own world will buy it to harvest it for parts. They will take all of the feats and spells and everything that they actually want out of that setting and remix it into their own setting where they are combining different aspects of every setting book. And so in that way, even if 70% of people don't have like one given setting that is their favorite, that's almost preferable maybe, because you're not just coming in, buying the Planescape box set and then leaving me. You're actually buying all of the setting books so that you can rummage around in all of those toolkits.
That's fair.
But
now, I asked a pretty slanted question on this, though, because I asked, do you care about the D&D setting? I didn't even say, is it your favorite? Or do you care about it a lot? I said, do you care? And that's where we've got the 70% who said no.
And so in that way, it doesn't matter if a D&D book is tied to a specific setting or not. A D&D book is a D&D book if you don't care about the settings. And so if you're just buying D&D books, it doesn't matter.
Oh, 100%. And I think that most people are, even in the setting, you know, they're going to be mining like narrative elements from the setting and cribbing. Oh, I like how the dragons work in this one. I like how, you know, warlocks are, I think that's cool. Like, that's what's so awesome. But the issue for them then comes when they try to, 30 years down the line, try to sell that back to people, that idea of nostalgia. And you're like, well, actually, in my world, whenever we played, it was different, right? With Warhammer, you're kind of, everybody's on the same page to an extent. Well, not me. I have my own canon for my own set, like, but everyone's playing, you know, kind of on the same page. And an element of that as well is that Games Workshop have been introducing more kind of canon characters. So if you had gone back to Warhammer like 20 years ago, Warhammer used to be all about your dudes. There's kind of this role-playing element of it, right? Because role-playing war games have always been so closely intermingled. Warhammer used to have a lot more, I'm going to make my guy, I'm going to name like the sergeant in my army, and I'm going to make him my general, and I'm going to create, used to be called fluff. I'm going to create lore around my army, right? My army live on this planet, and they fight the orcs for this reason, and they're jungle fighters. And you used to have the capacity to customize your army. Like, these guys are jungle fighters, so I'm going to give them these special abilities, and that means they can go through light cover terrain, and they can shoot through jungle leaves or whatever, right? And you used to be able to do that. You come up with a regiment, and that's cool. Now you can play 3 official regiments that were made by Games Workshop. You can play Katakan, Krieg, or Cadian. Those are the regiments, okay? You can paint your models differently if you want. You can kind of pretend, but mechanically, you're going to be using what the 3 different regiments are that Games Workshop have kind of set in stone. If you look at like an army like the Imperial Guard, there's 3 different, vastly different looking miniatures. So you're going to have to pick from one of those like vibes, those like aesthetics that you're going to want to play with. And they've been trying to squeeze everything in because they've discovered that the things that sell the best for Games Workshop are named characters. They sell, they've begun to bring back these characters called the Primarchs, who are just super Space Marines. They're the Space Marine guys, but they're taller, like a World of Warcraft raid boss, right? They're like bigger than everybody else around them, and they're super powerful, and everybody loves them because they're named, they have like a little bit of history, and everyone buys those models. And to me, yeah,
this is what happened to Magic the Gathering too, isn't it? With Commander play.
Well, they tried it, right?
Planeswalkers in particular were when Magic was trying to go to Hollywood and other places to get their IP out there, and they said, listen, you guys, sure, you're telling me Urza or Mishra or whatever, but this is like deep in the lore. You need something front and center that are characters, that are named characters for your brand, or we can't make a good movie out of this, and people aren't going to want to watch it. And so, Discourse, I think you hit the nail on the head a little bit here with this idea that by controlling the setting and having a shared setting, Games Workshop and Warhammer is able to do nostalgia bait a little bit more like movies or other franchises that have a curated experience. And D&D you almost uniquely among some of the big nostalgia brands of the 70s and 80s is less capable of doing that because of the fact that there's less of a shared experience, because it encouraged you to be creative and to make your own. And so therefore, like, there are all these modules that, people all talk about anyway, and I'll talk about them. I know about them because I know my history, and I'm a professional game designer. How many of them did I actually play when they came out? Not many.
Yeah.
Not many at all. There were a few that were that just the idea was cool, and I mined pieces of them into my own ongoing campaign because it was like, this is too cool not to grab like this part here and throw it in. But I was only running my own adventures when I was young. I only started doing published adventures when I got older, and I didn't have as much time to be creating my own stuff. So like, and if I hadn't become a professional game designer, or just if I wasn't the kind of person who was going to and who was just deep into looking at the lore, I might not even know all of these famous modules that were at times that I grew up with them theoretically, but didn't because I wasn't buying them.
I think they're mostly trying to sell vibe now as nostalgia bait, right? It's just kind of vibes. And honestly, a lot of like the OSR kind of space has banked on this as well. This like return to monkey, let's just roll the d20 and see what happens.
It does seem kind of true that all of the nostalgia marketing and nostalgia purchases that are happening for like a nostalgia of original D&D is money that's not going to Wizards of the Coast. That is money that's going to OSR games.
And I think a lot of that, though, is even it's nostalgia for like the rules in the game of the original game too, because of course those OSR games don't have the ability, they don't have the legal ability to own the actual characters and the actual dungeon names of those original dungeons. And I think, just to your point, the reason why that's successful is because as Discourse said, people didn't all play those old adventures and use those old characters. They just wrote their own. So the person who has rules that are similar to their rules can trigger the nostalgia, whereas the D&D characters and having the IP is actually less capable of doing that if you're doing it in a new game that does not look like the game that those people played back in the day. So you might be right that D&D is having... It's different than the thesis that's in the description here, but that perhaps D&D is having a uniquely difficult time triggering the sorts of nostalgia sales that are endemic in almost everything except for D&D that has that much of a brand name, and that OSR is picking up some of the slack from that.
I think that they also... Sorry, I think they also did a lot of damage to their ability to mine nostalgia out of their settings during the 4th edition era, when they started kind of standardizing what is in every setting and making sure that, like, Warforged weren't just Eberron. You also have Warforged and Faerun, and Warforged as a core race have to be in every setting now. And so now you can't evoke the nostalgia for specifically Eberron through things that were uniquely Eberron, like the Warforged.
Yeah, like I can see why they did that at because they want you to be able to sort of customize. You want to be able to play every class, every single ancestor, every single race, whatever in at each setting, right? They don't want to try and bar anybody off. But yeah, it's created this issue now where there's no texture to anything anymore. People just it all kind of folds into each other. And I think this is like one of the kind of core issues they have with trying to do TV show. Like I was reading an interview with the director, I think, of the new Netflix Dungeons and Dragons show, which is, by the way, a thing. And he was saying, or the writer, he was saying that, like, look, one of the issues with Dungeons and Dragons is there's no star, there's no character to like base anything off of. It's the players. The players at the table are the ones who are like the star of any story of Dungeons and Dragons. So how the hell do we evoke this? Turns out that actually, I think the D&D movie, Honor Among Thieves, did a really good job of that. But
they really did.
Honestly, it didn't seem to resonate, right? It didn't seem to resonate particularly with like the mass sort of audience.
Honestly, the movie did all right. It's just that they had very high expectations for it, and that they gave it a very, very high budget. If you look at how much money it made, that's a lot of money. It's just not enough money for what they wanted.
If it was
Yeah.
the 90s, they'd be making back the cash in DVD sales, and they'd do a sequel. But it's all streaming
Yeah.
now, so
Right. So
I do also
Thirsty
think it's a
asked something in
mistake. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
says
Yeah.
something in chat that I want to like hear your thoughts
Oh,
on
yes.
Discourse. He said, "Insert long rants on Games Workshop changing paint names and moving away from Space Marine / Imperial Guard. Here, they did it for a reason."
yeah.
So I'm not as much
all
into
the
Warhammer.
names-
What is that? What
Yeah.
does that mean? That particular pivot?
all the names changed for the factions. Well, not all of them, but most of the names changed in, I think it was like 2013, 2014. It was after a big court case called the Chapter House trial, where essentially Games Workshop took a small company to court called Chapter House because they had been making... Essentially, Games Workshop used to do a lot of art for, imagine all this stuff in the Warhammer setting, right? In the world of 40K, right? Here's these crazy tanks and these crazy aliens and these crazy creatures. We don't have miniatures for them. You can't buy them anywhere. But hey, if you want a kit bash, you want to make your own little models, for your army or whatever, here's some imaginative stuff. That's awesome. Well, there was companies, this created a cottage industry called, I'm going to get to the point. This created a cottage industry, and Chapter House was one of these companies who essentially would create these miniatures from the art that they saw in all the Warhammer products. There used to be army books, like for the Tyranids, that would release, and they would have unit profiles for miniatures that didn't exist. They'd just be like, here's some cool ideas, like here's some, figure it out, like create your own miniature somehow. Well, companies stepped into that and they started making miniatures. So Games Workshop took them to court, right? And in that court case, they discovered in the court case that actually their ownership of a lot of these kind of IP, these ideas, they weren't as strong as they thought they had. And they actually ended up losing a bunch of their claims. They won some, they lost some. And so when they came out of that trial, they were like, okay, we need to lock down this IP. We need to make sure that no one can ever take our stuff, which is kind of ironic because Warhammer is just a tableau of like 30 different sci-fi settings and a little bit of fantasy thrown in, all combined together, but plus more cock. And so they essentially renamed a bunch of the factions. You used to have the Imperial Guard, which was the mass army, like the mass human force in Warhammer. It's now renamed to Astra Militarum. You had Space Marines. Those are the Astartes now. Adeptus Astartes. Now, a lot of these like names were kind of in the lore before, but they weren't ever used, right? The old army books used to be Imperial Guard. Now it's Astra Militarum. Now you used to have Dark Eldar. Now you've got the Drukhari, And so I guess it's kind of a marker of some culture.
So they think
There's some people still fighting that war.
Something that they own more than Dark Eldar.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like Drukhari is something else.
It's spelled differently, okay?
Oh, okay, fair.
It's all in the spelling.
So I get it.
Yeah.
I actually knew about the lawsuits over the term Space Marines. I just didn't realize that that reorg was the fallout from that.
Yeah, and so it all spills out from there. That's also why they don't credit their artists either. If you could look in any of the Warhammer products, you look in the books, you'll never see which artist drew which.
I did know that, and I don't like it. But why don't they? So they don't credit them specifically as part of this? Are they trying to disenfranchise the artists from doing their own thing?
Yeah, they are. Because back in the 80s, whenever they were kind of a smaller, more sort of ramshackle operation based out of a small office, they had a bunch of freelancers and they didn't sign the proper contract work. So because these weren't employees, it meant that their works that they sculpted for Games Workshop didn't automatically belong to Games Workshop. And when they came to trial and tried to bring Chapter House to court, saying, you've stolen a bunch of our IP, you've stolen a bunch of our designs, Chapter House's argument was, you don't own these designs. These freelancers who sculpted them back in the 80s do, and they use the crediting to go back and to look and basically do a little bit of history, do a little bit of digging onto who sculpted what, and they start to bring all the receipts, and Games Workshop dropped like half their claims in the court. They were like, okay, well, let's not go there. Let's not talk about that. But after that, that's when they stopped crediting artists. So immediately after that, the White Dwarf magazine, like the week after that happens in the Chapter House trial, they stop crediting the artists and the sculptors and the designers.
So it's to prevent discovery during court cases if somebody wanted to try to go back to the artist and figure out if Games Workshop did a weird contract with them.
Yeah, I think it's a legacy thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a legacy thing because presumably they've got it all locked down now, right? Like they're much more kind of competent.
But everyone is always fighting the last battle that they lost, even if they actually have a defense against it. I've seen it in companies all the time where it's like, okay, great, yes, this was bad. This was very bad that it happened, but we're already ready for it, so we don't need to keep belaboring it. Let's look forward to the next big thing that's going to hit us next. And companies never do that. They're always just still in the trenches of whatever the last thing was.
And that's kind of, I guess, to be fair, that's probably one of the reasons why they've been so commercially successful, is that they are willing to, they just absorb things. They take controversy and they just absorb it. And they have a very large audience of fans who excuse it. Now, look, I'm a big fan of Warhammer. Like, I really enjoy Warhammer. I have to say this every time. I own a lot. People are trying to guess what armies I own in the chat, but I own most of them. Okay, like I have been playing Warhammer for like 20 years. I'm a huge fan. I love the game. I've loved most iterations of it. And yeah, but it's kind of like the Apple of wargaming, where it just has a very dedicated fan base who are willing to excuse a lot of behaviors and decisions and actions by the company because they're bought into the sense of community that it brings. You know, it brings a sense of you're part of a group, you're in the in group. So anytime there's any sort of attack or perceived attack on that in group, it can be, you know, you can be a little bit, they can be defensive a little bit, I think, sometimes.
They want to circle the wagons against an outside agitation.
Yeah, and then that creates a lot of very negative people who you know, because Games Workshop do stuff that's very antagonistic. They raise prices, for example, constantly. I've got almost every single person that I know who started playing Warhammer like 20 years ago has eventually been priced out of the game in some capacity, where they just cannot afford it, right? They have a kid, they're like, I can't play Warhammer anymore. Yeah. And they want to play, but they can't, right?
Having a kid is also an expensive hobby. Like it's cigarettes, it's alcohol, it's Warhammer, or it's children.
Yeah. Yeah. Big hobby. And they're all kind of equal, I think, morally. Yeah. So, you know, yeah, so you can get priced out like very easily from Warhammer. Or there's lots of people who can't afford, like, I'm sure there's lots of people in chat right now who would love to play Warhammer who will tell you they don't play it because they cannot afford to buy into the miniatures. But people will respond with, well, it's a luxury hobby, right? It's a luxury hobby. Well, I mean, from that argument, everything's a luxury at that stage, right? And if you look at the actual economics of miniature wargaming, it doesn't have to be an expensive hobby. It doesn't have to be expensive at all, because there's other companies like War Games Atlantic, Warlord Games. These companies that create hard plastic miniatures, War Cradle, hard plastic miniatures that are of equal quality with Games Workshop, maybe sometimes a little bit lower, right? But they're high quality molds. And they are much cheaper. Like, you're talking orders of magnitude cheaper than that, right? So this is one of the reasons why Games Workshop is so successful, because they've managed to cultivate this audience of people who'll spend a lot of money on the miniatures, and that gives them a really high amount of profit margins. Like, their profit margin's crazy. I think it's like, I haven't looked at this in years, but I think it's like 50%, maybe more. It's like a wild amount of profit margin. Like, Hasbro wish that they could they could charge the prices that Games Workshop charge for products. Right. And then they have the treadmill. Warhammer's a treadmill, right? Dungeons and Dragons isn't. Dungeons and Dragons, Hasbro are terrified of selling a new edition in case people stop buying their current products, right? Games Workshop will do a new edition every 3 years. Every 3 years, there is a new edition of Warhammer 40k. There's also a new edition of Warhammer Age of Sigmar, which is their fantasy game. There's also a new edition of Horus Heresy, which is their historical Warhammer setting. So they've got a new game coming out every single year of a new edition, and people buy into it. And as part of that cycle, there's also a new army book for every single army, and there's about 13 armies now. So there's 13 different books that they're selling. Every couple of months, they got a new book out. And now what they discovered after COVID, and this is how they're making so much money today, is that they could also sell limited edition army bundles, where you buy this one box for like £200, like $300, and you get like 20 miniatures, and limited edition, right? You can buy it on Saturday. You can pre-order it on Saturday, but if you're not there on Saturday morning and you do not put in an order, you will not get it, and you'll never have a chance to get it ever again. So are you going to buy it? Yes or no? Yes or no? Are you going to buy it right now? You're going to buy it right now, right? And it's this pressure that gets put on people, and they're like, oh my God, this is a lot of money, but like, on the other hand, I'm not going to get another chance to buy this. And the things that are inside this box won't be available for like months later, but we don't know how long it'll be, because Games Workshop never say. They never say how long it's going to be. So there's a lot of predatory practices involved in how Games Workshop have monetized Warhammer. And this has had a really negative effect on the rest of wargaming, on the rest of the hobby space, right? We don't have an OSR in in wargaming. We don't have like these other alternative cultures. Well, we sort of do, but it's so small, and because the vast majority of people, they bump into Warhammer and they go, oh, actually, no thanks, that's too expensive, and they don't realize that there's a lot of more affordable ways to play wargaming.
I
So-
think one of the reasons that people are so much more willing to accept new editions regularly out of Warhammer is because they perceive their primary monetary investment into the hobby as the miniatures and not the game, not the game books. And so, as long as the miniatures can still be used with the new edition, it doesn't really matter that a new game book has to be purchased because they haven't wasted their investment. Whereas with a new edition of D&D, people are like, oh, so now all my books are garbage.
Yes, 100%. But that does happen with Warhammer. All your books are
Yeah.
garbage. I've got a library of books
Right.
that are
But
been
people
read
don't
and relevant.
perceive but
Yeah.
people don't perceive the books as the thing that they're buying. They do buy the books, but the books aren't the thing that they've invested in. The miniatures
Yeah.
are the things that they've invested in.
Right. So
It's like
I
the
wanna
appetizer,
drill
you know?
down on something you said, Discourse, to see if what we think about this claim. So this is not a new thing for me. This is sort of paraphrasing something that Discourse said before. What do we think about the idea that D&D as a gateway is effective because as people's first tabletop RPG, it's easy to get into as a player, and then you could move to another tabletop RPG, even though they kind of want you to stay in their own community. Whereas Warhammer as a gateway into wargaming is ineffective because it's already so luxury and so expensive that people bounce off of all of wargaming from Warhammer, and that is a good thing on D&D's part, whether intentional or not. What do you
Well,
think about that claim?
Or you get into Warhammer and you've invested in the miniatures, and now you're kind of in that ecosystem because, well, I'm not going to go buy like the Fallout miniatures because I've got all these Warhammer ones now, and I've spent so much money. I can only keep up with one miniature line, right? Whereas with Dungeons and Dragons, you can buy the book, but then you can be like, I'll check out Pathfinder, right? I'll go buy the book and I'll have a read of it. I do think so. Like, it's kind of funny because people will complain that Dungeons and Dragons isn't a good gateway because there's a lot of mechanics there. There's a lot to kind of get to grips with. There's a lot of meat on the bones, right? I do think there's probably better like gateway RPGs where you can read it and you can digest it and it's easy to play and get into as a new person. But like compared to Warhammer and the investment required to start playing that game, like forget about it.
Yeah, in that way, I absolutely agree that D&D is a better gateway RPG. I think the thing that D&D does that makes people feel like they don't want to squander the investment they've already made is that because D&D is, like, if you were to make a scale of, like, number of rules and complexity of game of all TTRPGs, D&D is a little bit more complicated to learn. And so people run into D&D as their first game. They aren't deterred by it. They do enter the hobby and play it, but they don't necessarily move on because they don't realize that other games are easier to learn than D&D is. They think that in order to play a new game, they have to reinvest the same amount of time that they spent learning D&D, or they just come to a new game and expect it to be D&D and don't engage with it for the distinct game that it is. And when the mechanics are different, they just go, oh, I don't understand this. I'm going back to D&D.
It sounds really wanky when I say this, but I think that one of the big things is that like it's a mind shift. It's a mindset shift from I'm a D&D player to I'm a role player, right? Or like it's the same thing with Warhammer. I'm a Warhammer hobbyist. People will say that. And I'll go, no, you're a war gamer. You play different war games because it leaves you open to the possibility of playing other games. And I 100% agree. I think people play Dungeons and Dragons and they think I play D&D and they think it's this massive investment in time and energy. And I find that in my experience, when people play one more game, if they play like Call of Cthulhu, if they play Pathfinder, they play any other game, which is why I've been a big proponent of Daggerheart, they immediately are open to playing more games after that. They realize that actually other games can do other stuff and that other games can have their own vibes and their own stories.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The number of people who play only one game, which is D&D for most of them, is very high percentage of the entire hobby. But the number who play exactly two is like the lowest because once somebody plays two games, they probably play more.
You break the seal. It's done. Let's go. Yeah.
That's right. And Thirsty in chat was talking about something that is basically the Metcalfe's Law, Reed's Law, that shows up on this channel a decent amount of time, where the size of the player base, this is true for
Mhm.
online games, this is true for tabletop, for war games, for any of these, exponentially to the size of the player base gives you like the utility or the value for community members joining it and being able to form games, being able to like get in, whether or not like the actual content is inviting, just
Mhm.
because once you have that many people, it's a critical mass.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I've joined games before that have not got big player bases, and it's kind
Mhm.
of lonely, you know. You're kind of hanging
Yeah.
about looking for content, looking for stuff to talk about. I think that's a big element of all, like both RPGs and war games and a lot of these hobbies, is that there's a lot of discussion. You know, you feel like you're part of a community. You get to engage with people. You get to research and find out like what's good. I think that's a big thing that Dungeons and Dragons does really successfully. Same with Pathfinder, is that they have content that you can get to grips with online, right? You can theory craft, you can talk with people about like optimal build strategies, and I think without that kind of mechanical complexity, it's harder to have a sustainable community. And that's something Warhammer does really well as well. They also have a lot of competitive players who maintain this bare minimum of play, right? And there's people who have there's tier lists, there's content out there because there's stuff to talk about. And for Warhammer, the meta is always shifting. For Dungeons and Dragons, it isn't. And I wonder if there would be an actual there'd be more uptake with some of the books if there was more shifts in the meta of what's powerful as a class. I don't think so though, because it's like it's a cooperative experience more so than
Mhm.
competitive.
I think it would probably turn people off if they were doing
Mm,
enough balance adjustments that it actually shifted the meta. The closest they came to that was in 4th edition D&D, when
mm.
they actually tried to fix everything that they found over and over again, and people actually just got mad that there were so many erratas. They would be like, why did I even buy this? Some of these things have been errated more than once. And so like it's something you
Yeah.
always have to be worried about with books, which I think we'll shift over into another one of my rants that is very related to this topic, about how books are just kind of different than any other physical product. In people's heads, those books, especially if they're PDFs, which are just online, but even if they're
Mhm.
a physical book, they're just words, they're just thoughts. And so people will be like, "What? You're trying to charge me $50 for this giant mega dungeon that took the authors and artists hundreds, if not maybe even 1,000 hours to put together? That's preposterously high." And then they'll sometimes
Mhm.
go turn around and spend over $1,000 on Dwarven Forge terrain to create that dungeon that they barely tolerated buying for $50 in the book, and get like special dice sets that match the themes of the dungeon that are themselves $100 for the set of
Mhm.
dice. And I'm not saying this because I think that the terrain or the dice folks are
Mhm.
bad. I actually think they're great. They're great, and it's great that people will pay that much for those products. It's just, it's kind of sad that our psychology, and I say this with a collective hour because it's just how most people's brains work on this, is that for some reason those words, those ideas, those books don't hold the value. Whereas when you have
Mhm.
stuff and you get that stuff in front of you and it's like, it has weight, it's a 3D miniature, look at this.
Yeah.
Or a board game, look, I can punch out all these
Mhm.
little cardboard thingies and put them around, and I've got meeples. Suddenly that price and what we're willing to pay, and I'm sometimes guilty of this too, right? It just goes up. And is
Yeah.
there something D&D or other tabletop RPGs can learn to sort of overcome this, other than like make a board game version of
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
tabletop RPG that has components?
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
gonna say
I
exactly that. Yeah.
exactly. I think that every hardcover pre-written adventure could be a like Gloomhaven or Descent style board game, and that you would make so much more money selling it that way.
I suspect that even if you sold like STL files to go along with some of those books, so it's like, oh, here's all the major NPCs, like miniatures, and here's the monsters inside them. Spoilers, don't look if you're not gonna. People are gonna look anyway. I think people would buy them more. At the end of the day, I think that the reason why people are willing to spend so much more money for these like dungeon terrain and like even miniatures, right? Like I've got a little mini Jim Carrey as the Riddler here as a miniature I've been painting on my table, and I would pay any amount of money for that. Like there is no amount of money that I would not pay to have a little tiny Jim Carrey on my table. So there's nothing you can do. Like there's no book that could ever get me to pay that much money. And I think a lot of it is just spectacle. That's a lot of these games are selling themselves. Like the board games, you'll see it's like, look at all these miniatures. There's so much stuff. And often it's kind of too much stuff, I think, for a lot of these board games. Like Gloomhaven, I don't play it anymore because it's too much stuff. Like I can't get it on the table. I got to take it off the table. Like I would rather just have a book and I can just use my imagination. But it just, I think you hit on it. It's a quirk of psychology. I think it's an emotional thing. I think it is just tactile. We like to have little bricks and we like to have little toys and we like to kind of move them around a table and we like to just smash them together. Whereas with a book, books are, it's cool and all. It's just an idea. You're selling me an idea, whenever I could have a little, like I'll pay money for little bricks instead.
So there definitely are STL minis companies out there that put out very simple games with a bunch of STL minis and they do great. What is the difference between that and, I'll give an example, Battlezoo.com. We've got STLs for some of the characters from the Adventure Path, Jewel of the Indigo Isles that are from that setting. They're like the iconics that are in the art. They've got pre-generated characters for those. We've got STLs for like some of the Eldamon that are out there. And I'm not saying nobody bought them. There are people who have. Some people have shown us that they made them and brought them to a convention, and Steven was elated. But I'll just say that, like, they don't do that well. I don't have the exact numbers. Steven's the one who runs that. But, like, I know that if they did that well, he would have done it again. And he didn't, right? Yeah. So what do you think is the difference there? Is it that you need critical mass? You need to cultivate the culture of people who are buying these STLs rather than the culture of tabletop people? And maybe does that mean tabletop people aren't ready to buy those, or does it mean that you have to shift the frame in a different way?
So for STLs, it's just a very niche group of people who can do anything with them. So like, I mean, I'm a YouTuber who covers war games, and if I won't buy STLs because I don't have a 3D printer that can really 3D print them very well. So, and I think like 99.999% of people who are even into wargaming don't have a 3D printer, right? It's a very difficult process. There's like toxicity issues, and you've got to like, it's a little bit of a hobby in and of its own. Now, it's a bit easier than people give it credit for, but it's a smaller proportion of people who are ever going to be able to do that. I think a lot of people buy STLs like aspirationally. So there's a lot of, like one day I'm going to print this off, right? And it's the same thing with board games and stuff. People buy that stuff aspirationally. They see all the spectacle of like the big tables and they're like, one day I'm going to play that game. They're never going to play that game. They're never going to get that out on the table. But they would love to do so. Not that people don't do that with RPG books as well. I think I've got like a bookshelf full of book games that I'll never probably play. But they buy these things aspirationally. There's websites like My Mini Factory and stuff. It could be just the case that people aren't looking for that from like Roll for Combat. They're not looking. They don't know to expect STL files, right? Because there is a big group of people who will buy them. There's like companies such as One Page Rules, for example, who have created extremely successful businesses off the back of selling STL files for like for armies of miniatures. But I don't feel like it's kind of gotten into the RPG space as much as wargaming. Wargamers seem to have really taken the 3D printing, and I think that's in part to Warhammer. I think that's because of the cost of Warhammer. It's much more cost effective to 3D print. Whereas
people I know who are really into Warhammer, except maybe I don't ask you Discourse, but the people I know, like I guess in Meat Space, who are really into Warhammer, are also all the people I know who are the most into 3D printing. It's an intersection, and the Venn diagram is just one circle. There's no part that is outside of the circle.
I think that 3D printers never really permeated the TTRPG space in the way that maybe they could have because of the huge pivot to online gaming. I think that a lot of people would have followed a trajectory where they got into TTRPGs, they were drawing on their Chessex map, they realized Dwarven Forge existed, maybe they bought a couple Dwarven Forge pieces, then they realized that they could print their own things like Dwarven Forge, and so then you get a 3D printer and you start printing and you ascend, like it becomes a step along the terrain making path that I think was just kind of cut off because nobody's making terrain for TTRPGs now, for the most part. Everybody's playing online in VTTs, and you're buying maps from people who draw 2D maps for VTTs. And if that shift hadn't happened and in-person gaming had continued its trajectory towards the terrain space, people would see like the Dimension 20 beautiful vista battle maps as aspirational instead of just, oh, that's a production thing that I can never do.
Yeah.
That's not the way I play my game. I play online. They play in person because they're an entire production, but that's not me.
Yeah. That's I never thought of that, but I think you're right. I think you're 100% correct. I think that it has completely, online play has completely kind of cut the legs from under RPG 3D printing niche.
So
Utterly.
wargaming people are way more likely to own a 3D printer than TTRPG people because you could use the 3D printer not only for the models and the miniatures, but also for terrain. And I suspect that a lot of people, if you're getting like the mainstream Warhammer models and you're not printing your own models, terrain is the primary thing you're using a 3D printer for.
Yeah, and like honestly, the online tools to play war games in just aren't great, right? Like, you've got like Tabletop Simulator, which is okay. It's okay. I've played over COVID. I played like in a Star Wars Legion tournament, but it's just not the same. You want that spectacle of the miniatures. Like a big element of wargaming is having everything out on the table and being like, yeah, this looks awesome, right? So. Yeah, definitely. Whereas that doesn't seem to be the case with RPGs. Most of the games I always played in were with the theater of the mind anyway, unless they were like a tactical kind of RPG. And one issue I've always had with miniatures, like I use miniatures a lot in RPGs, but like one issue I've always had is that, you can't really, it's hard to build a dungeon out of it, and keep it secret from the party. Like they don't know where they're just going to look at the table. Also, they might show up at the dungeon entrance and be like, yeah, actually, I don't think we're going to do that today. I think we're going to go back to town and we're going to go over this other place instead and go across the sea to a completely different place. You're like, damn, I spent a lot of time painting some monsters for that dungeon. And you just have to accept that, With wargaming, we're here to play. We're here to play this game. We're going to use the terrain on the table.
So do you think that it's already moved past the point of no return towards digital, or is there a path, is there a way, is there a model to bring people back to the table using possibly STLs or some other strategy with physical products? So Thirsty in chat mentioned Archvillain Chronicles as an example of an STL use case, which it looked like when I Googled it is a $5 per month Patreon that gives you like STLs but that are linked to monsters and combat encounters and some other mechanics for that. And that is obviously that's not very much money that you're doing on that, but if you have enough people, then it'll make it for it.
The Patreon model is great for 3D print. So Patreon model has been super successful for 3D print companies. Because you get this big mass of people who are willing to spend like $5 to get a bunch of miniatures, even if those miniatures are aspirational. There's the digital pile of shame that people accumulate because they're just constantly getting all these like digital files, and that's how One Piece Rules does it in the wargaming space, right? They've got a Patreon, and I think that is a space for RPG creators to release. You can do like monsters, you can do big hordes of monsters, you can do themed months where you're going to do like this kind of thing. You're going to do like water naval themed like prints for that one. If you're ever doing like a pirate campaign, and then next month it'll be like cowboys or whatever. You can do all sorts of different stuff. But yeah, I think there is a demand there, but how people play RPGs is disparate, right? People play them in different ways. Some people do theater of the mind. Some people use battle maps. Lots of people are using online to play these days. Whereas with war games, at the end of the day, it's about the miniatures. Like that is the focus. So you're just going to get more people into 3D printing those miniatures, especially when they're more expensive. Like you can get a lot of affordable, like there's companies that will sell you Dungeons and Dragons-esque miniatures for a pretty affordable price, right? with Warhammer, if you want to play in a tournament, if you want to play at your local game store, if you want to play like at a local Games Workshop store, certainly a Warhammer store, you're gonna need to buy the official miniatures. You can't 3D print them unless you can kind of get away with it. You can be cheeky and sneaky. But you're gonna have to bring the official miniatures. No one is gonna be like, no, you can't use those miniatures in Dungeons and Dragons. They're not official, right? You can buy it from a host of different companies for those.
I think that a return to table and a what word do I want to use? Tabletop players embracing using 3D printers to print materials for their games will, if it does come, it will come alongside a wave of mainstream LARPs, and that people will not necessarily be getting a 3D printer to print terrain and models, but rather props and accessories like coins.
Yeah, that's really big now, especially because those use FDM printers, which is actually I've got 3 of those. So the FDM printers are way less toxic, though not entirely. The studies are still open your window at least, but they're safer, they're easier to use, they're way more user friendly. You've got companies now who spring up where it's literally you just plug in the 3D printer, then you click a button and it's like it starts printing. You're like, hey, that's it, it's done, and it's that easy. And they're more solid. You can use those for terrain as well, for wargaming and for RPGs, but you can also use them for LARP tools. And yeah, I've been seeing that more and more and more, which is really cool, honestly, which is really awesome to see.
Maybe that's the answer. Jubensha props. There's a super chat from Dylan Galt who said started woodworking to make table for VTT maps.
Oh. That's cool though. I've seen people doing the like the tables with the inlay where you put the TV in the table, or you have a projector above, and then you have like the virtual map and everybody can move their tokens while they're at the table physically with each other.
That's like there's
certain rides in like theme parks that use projection mapping in combination with animatronics, or like sets where instead of having an animatronic that you've like actually painted the animatronic themselves, you projection map a character and their costume onto it. And so the animatronic is sculpted in the shape that you want, but it hasn't been painted. So if you have a piece of like blank terrain and then you project like a red cliff onto it, you could use the same terrain to project like an underwater sequence or something. Like Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway does this in Disneyland and Disney World, where they have you return into the same showrooms, but they change what that showroom is showing and what the scene is. And so if you had like an overhead projector going down onto blank terrain, you have like infinite variability of like the terrain is 3D now, but you can change what you're projecting down onto that surface.
That's cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. That would be cool if that were a thing that existed.
Yeah. So Thirsty says the true use case is to up the convention demo appeal with 3D print terrain and STL stock products.
And like the high budget experiences like D&D in a castle and everything.
Sure. Yeah. Or even if you go to like the not that high budget, but it was a little more expensive for tickets than most of the things at Gen Con, while being a shorter demo. The adventure Linda wrote for Gen Con, last Gen Con for Battle Cry, that was like the Battle of Hell Knight Hill one, had all these minis that Thirsty painted and all this like really great production value. And I don't remember exactly, but I believe the tickets were just like significantly more expensive than you would pay for a normal like full 4 to 5 hours slot, and it was like really short. So, but people really wanted to do it because you look at those minis and they're so cool, and so it's a good example of that same use case, even if it's in a different way of monetizing, which is ticket sale prices for a convention.
Definitely. And it's kind of funny because I think that I think the 3D printing in a lot of ways is something that the Games Workshop don't want to encourage, as opposed to, I suppose, for Hasbro, it really adds value to the game. I think whenever you can get lots of really cool terrain and print them all off. Like, I think the 3D printing is going to really benefit the game, especially because it does encourage people to do in-person play. But yeah, like the spectacle of seeing one at a convention, like it always gets my goat. Whenever I see a table that's been laid out and it just looks awesome, it's so sick.
Trying to think back to our not the D&D and Warhammer controversy topic, but the topic of what these two games have to learn from each other. And it does seem like a lot of what's going on with Warhammer is getting absorbed not into D&D but into Magic.
Like the universes beyond?
Yeah, like you were saying about the Warhammer having the limited release drops, that's kind of what's going on with Secret Lair.
Oh, true.
And then the focus on changing the way that people play to the kind of commander-focused play. And I don't know, I just get a vibe.
Yeah.
Off of, like, I mean, obviously Magic is the golden goose of Wizards of the Coast. It is the game that actually makes money, unlike D&D, which is the game that exists that they bought because they like it.
It's the one that is like the holy grail in the sense that it's a thing you're questing for but you never actually find, is monetizing the full potential that they see in D&D. And then honestly, a lot of us see in D&D as this name that everyone knows, even the people who hated it in the 80s and wanted to have it burned as being like some kind of satanic thing. They all knew what it was. And so it feels like it has this potential to be like up there with some of the top franchises of all time. But it never
you gotta remember
is.
that, like, WizKids, you know, whenever you look at like miniature sold, they're like up there in the list. They're like number 2, I think, either after Warhammer or sometimes they're above them, right? So they sell a lot of miniatures as well, but they're cheaper, you know, more affordable minis. Look, I agree. Like, I think that you would imagine that Dungeons and Dragons would be raking in cash, would be absolutely killing it, because everybody knows about Dungeons and Dragons. But Warhammer is more like Magic the Gathering in that it is a product that can monetize the same person over and over and over and over again. And you can have that kind of wheel population, those people who spend a disproportionate amount of the money, you know, or they make up a disproportionate amount of the kind of gross revenue of a company. Dungeons and Dragons, you buy like what, the books?
Yeah.
And they like, now you're done, right? You're done. Like, whatever, like maybe a supplement.
You can be. You can be done after any number of books. You buy one book and you can be done.
Yes.
You might not even buy a book. You might just find it, you know, online. So
even if you want to get fancy and buy every book that they put out, that's still compared to the Magic whales and the Warhammer wares, that makes you a dolphin at most. The person who's just like, I love D&D, I'm going to buy every book in the special edition limited cover. It's still only a dolphin compared to the whales of Magic and Warhammer.
100%.
And then it's also true that for Warhammer and for Magic, every person who's coming to the table to play needs to buy their own materials. Every person playing Warhammer needs their own army. Every person playing Magic needs their own deck. You can show up to D&D and your friend bought the book, and that's the only book your entire table of 5 people needs.
Honestly, out of all of the campaigns that I've ever run with friends, I feel like I have one player who consistently buys my books. And when I say my books, are like the books that he knows, that even that I wrote and that like I worked on, and that buying them, you know, it doesn't directly support me, but it supports the companies that I was working for. All the rest of them just use free resources or the fact that I have the books because I wrote them, or in the past I was the one who bought them.
Yeah, you gotta be hardcore to buy stuff in RPGs. You gotta be really into it. You know what I mean?
Everybody's showing up with their $100 dice, and no shade, I also have $100 dice. But everyone at the table has their $100 dice,
and no books because they just use
one single
archives.
person has a book.
Yeah. But if you don't buy any Warhammer miniatures, like, what are you doing? You're not doing Warhammer then, really.
You can't
right?
play.
Yeah, like there'll be people who argue that, like, oh, I watch, you know, YouTube lore videos and I maybe buy some of the novels here and there, but like they're not the core audience of Warhammer, right? The core audience are the people who are buying, like, from Games Workshop's perspective, I think you do you know, but from Games Workshop's perspective, they just care about the people who are buying the miniatures, you're consistently doing so. And if you stop buying miniatures, they don't care anymore about you. Goodbye, because they're going to keep focusing down on this card. They refer to them as sticky. The audience of Warhammer are sticky in the sense that they keep buying, they gloom on, and they can raise the price, and the audience still remains with them. With Dungeons and Dragons, it's like, man, I might have bought I kind of almost reluctantly bought the 2024 books. I'm like, I've got my 2014 books. I don't really know, do I need to have this? The answer was yes, because this is my job, I guess. But yeah. So yeah, you can just get away with a lot with. And the same is true of Magic the Gathering, right? And a lot, I think Hasbro know this. They're not dumb about this. Like, they know that they need to monetize Dungeons and Dragons in a different way if they wanted to make the money that Games Workshop make.
That's what the executives were saying. Yeah. They got lambasted for it because it is kind of very greedy sounding, but that doesn't mean that they were wrong, that it was under monetized compared to its potential. Compared to the potential that the brand could have.
I think they're wrong in the sense that I don't think that Dungeons and Dragons can or should be monetized as effectively as they want it to be, basically. I don't think that there is as much money as they would like there to be. And I think that that's fine. For me, that's fine. I don't think there needs to be that much money. And as a consumer, I would prefer for the books to be affordable. I prefer for the books to be accessible. I prefer the game to be a great gateway into the role-playing game hobby than really heavily monetized and make loads of money and have Hasbro's stock be real high. I don't care about that. I'm not a Hasbro stockholder.
So here's my devil's advocate. Here's my devil's advocate now. I will first fully admit that actually companies are greedily want to increase their profits to actually put up their stock, and that is what they would do if they were able to find a way to monetize other things. They would not do the thing I'm about to say. But let's say you're not a publicly traded company, okay? You're privately owned. If there was a way to better monetize then you would be able to sell it for less. You would be able to sell the main base game for less and make it more accessible. If there was a way to be like, okay, so we figured out a way that like there's like a group of 500 Dungeons and Dragons whales can pay 10 times what currently the entire worldwide population pays on Dungeons and Dragons in a year, then would that mean, I think that would mean that you could easily make, they might not do this, or maybe they would because they would find that for Reed and Metcalf's Law it's beneficial to bring more people in. You could easily say, okay, yeah, now the books are 30% less, and are we selling them at a loss actually, kind of, for the art and the other things in it? Yeah, we're actually losing a little bit of money, and it's okay. Because those 500 whales who are paying some amount that like would make Scrooge McDuck drop his jaw are somehow paying for everything, right? Like, so I'm not saying companies are like benevolent enough that they would kick some of it back, but maybe even for their greed of bringing more people in, they would.
Now, I have an opinion on how Hasbro could be monetizing Dungeons and Dragons successfully, and I think that I'm a genius. And I don't understand why they haven't already done this, because this is the best idea that anyone has ever had and will ever had. So we all know that Disney is a profitable company. And we all know that most of Disney's money comes from the parks and the Disney adults going to the park. And we all know that the way that the people going to the parks engage with the IP that Disney owns is not that they necessarily stan Elsa. It's just that they want to go into a ride that is like vaguely frozen landscapes, right? And they want to see an animatronic of like, I recognize this character. And we all know that Dungeons and Dragons players covet immersion. And so why do we not have a Faerun theme park where people can go to a tavern where the tavern keeper is a 15th level retired adventurer, and you go on the ride where you fight a dragon on the ride, and it doesn't matter that the IP doesn't have a main character that you would use in a film, because as soon as you enter the park, in the same way that you're the main character of your at-home D&D, don't say roller coaster.
You're the hero.
This cartoon, yes, exactly. You are the hero of the theme park. There doesn't need to be a main character of the theme park because you are that, and the experience around you doesn't have to be specifically flavorful. It just has to be a vague pastiche, because that's all people really want, even out of Star Wars land.
So I want to answer that by asking chat for some help here, because chat, I need your help. Steven's random things that he like raves about sometimes in these channels have blurred in my mind to the point where I can't be sure if this is a real thing or it's a pastiche of several other things that he said. But didn't Steven say that there were some theme parks or some places that were doing something vaguely like that?
Yes.
But they
But
not
it was
full time. It was just like a
Mhm,
very temporary,
mhm,
like just
mhm.
for a few days you could do this
Yes.
D&D
That was
type thing.
Universal Studios Hollywood. We can wait for chat to catch up and to say what I've just said, but that was at Universal Studios Hollywood, and it was one single limited time experience.
Fair enough. So
Low key, I think that actually, I think that the way to monetize Dungeons and Dragons is to actually just make their own theme park.
Yeah.
They should just create these living spaces. Yeah, like
that's
screw
what
it.
Disney
Chat says-
did. Disney has
Yeah,
not
chat
been
says-
making very much money on their other stuff, but their theme parks, oh boy, have been
Yeah.
going up and
Chat
up.
says Jenny Nicholson has a video about Evermore. I'm aware of the video of Evermore. I'm aware of Evermore as a park, and I'm aware of the problems that Evermore had. I'm also aware of the problems that the Galactic Star Cruiser had. However, Hasbro has the money to invest in making this thing not shit, and they also don't need to sell an immersive LARP experience. They just have to sell what Super Nintendo World at Universal Studios is. As nobody actually wants to go to Super Nintendo World to LARP that they are a character of the Mushroom Kingdom. They just want to
Hey,
be
whoa.
surrounded by. Okay, I do and you do, and we should do that.
That would be
But
fun.
most people just want to be surrounded by the vibes of being in Nintendo come to life. They just want to see a like Mario block in front of them and know that they could use their power band to jump up and make the ding noise.
So I think that that to tie this
Wait,
back
really?
to
Could you do that?
to one of
Yeah,
the
you
things
can
that
do
we were
that. Yeah,
mentioning
that's a thing.
earlier
That's awesome.
Yeah.
about like
See, exactly.
how do you cash in effectively on the nostalgia 30 years later?
Mhm.
It feels to me like maybe the reason that Disney World is now able to jack up their prices and then make tons of money is that they have the benefit of 30 years ago it was much less expensive, and it was the sort of the idea that for many families you could go to Disney World and that was the thing you would do to be a really magical trip with your kids. And then you put that in a cauldron, you wait 30 years, and now those kids are adults and they remember that that was the thing, and now you jack up the prices so high and see what happens. But the problem with that
Yeah.
is it takes a long time. Do you think that that would
Yeah.
still be effective for a new theme park that was D&D
So-
instead of like glomming on to an old theme park that already had that nostalgia benefit?
Discourse, you go first, and then I have a very short statement that I'll make.
Okay, you go first. Then you go first.
Okay. We already know that people are willing to travel and spend money on Gen Con.
That's
People
true.
will travel for this.
Yeah, they
People-
will. They will, which is why they
Yeah.
should set it in Ireland, because they already have access to a big slave labor population there that they've used before. So they should just do it there, you know? Just
I
do
mean,
that again.
Ireland would have a lot of benefits. I hear that there's financial reasons you could put things there. There's also
There
just
is.
like
Yeah.
there's a lot of nice places, and also just like the vibes that you might want for a medieval D&D type thing you could get if you were somehow around the place where you could be like, hey, leave this area and go for a while, and you can go to an old castle as another thing. That's not our thing. There just is a castle here that you can go
We'll put
to.
a dragon in it, you know?
Well,
It'll be cool.
What you do is you run your D&D in a castle that is like only an hour away from Faerun land.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, Sword,
yeah,
Sword,
exactly.
Sword Coast World.
I think Ireland would be willing to give up one of its castles to Hasbro. To,
Oh,
to
well, in
do
that
Dungeons
case,
and
it would
Dragons style. I
literally
think we
be
just give them one.
like
yeah.
a real Irish castle.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
we have loads of them, to be fair. They're all scattered about the place. So they just pick one.
And,
One
I,
they
and
they
like
look
when
of-
I
they
went
like the look of.
to
Yeah.
Ireland and we went to a castle, there was a movie that was shooting there. So they definitely at least temporarily give them to people to do things with.
So I think it's really funny though, because look, if we're talking like evil ways to make money, where they might be able to make lots and lots of money somehow, I actually don't think that they've got a lot of avenues open to them. But there is like a good way for them, I think, to make money, and it's to sell books, to sell good content that has been written well, that has interesting new classes, interesting new like worlds and supplements, that has fun stuff inside it the people are like, I want to buy this new book. It sounds cool. And they buy the new book and they say, that was fun. I'll buy the next one if it comes out. And they do that. And I think, honestly, they would be able to make enough money to sustain Dungeons and Dragons and continue to make really cool books.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, they
They
can
make a
sustain Dungeons and
sustainable
Dragons
amount
that way.
for Dungeons and
They
Dragons.
can sustain that way.
But they want to make an amount that their aspirations for Dungeons and Dragons brand's ability gives them in their heads.
Get what we want. We just don't always get what we want, you know? It just, sometimes you just gotta say, right, I'll have an apple. That's it. No more candy cane for me. I just gotta, eat my fruits and vegetables and just accept it.
Unfortunately, in the United States, it's illegal for a company to say that.
Okay.
If it's publicly traded.
In that case, then, they should do limited edition. They should do limited edition, like, game, like Dungeons and Dragons, like all the time. Yeah. They should digitize everything. They should stop selling physical books outside of bundles. So they should only do, you have to buy the PDF and you have to make a D&D Beyond account to do so. Yeah, they should honestly license it to everything, get as many mobile games out there, license it to the gambling industry more, because they do that already, but they should do it more. I'm trying to think of other ways to make money. Just like sell it. Just sell it to everybody.
Industry. There you go. It's like find a tie-in with casinos on the dice aspect.
Yeah.
Oh
you
no.
pay off lawmakers.
Yeah.
You pay off lawmakers so that you make it illegal not to buy Dungeons and Dragons.
So Jess, you joking about it being illegal in the U.S. to say that you're
wasn't
okay?
a joke.
But the thing is, like, while it's not literally illegal, it is actually considered to be like malfeasance towards the investors or something like that,
right.
and you'll get in big trouble.
Duty. Yeah, you have a fiduciary duty to your shareholders to grow the company and make money for them.
It's basically malpractice, which is just like,
Yeah, I would make the argument though, and I'm sure that Chris Cox, if you're listening, dude, I got your back here. So I would make the argument that
he's playing with one of his 30 D&D groups.
Yeah, he's in a game right now. I'm sorry.
He's in a game right now. Okay, well, someone in Chris Cox's game who's playing right now, who's listening to this. Okay?
No, someone in one of the other 29 games.
After the game. It's someone who's not. It's like a chess game. One of those guys in the middle of like 30 chess games, standing behind like the 30 DM screens. Occasionally he'll move a miniature, and then he'll move over to the next table and go like, the orc says no, and then he'll move to the next one. So they do have a responsibility, right, to maximize value for shareholders, I think. I'm not super up on my American law. However, you could argue, I think, quite well, actually, that by not aggressively monetizing Dungeons and Dragons, you're actually securing long-term value for shareholders, because you're ensuring that there's an integrity to the product, right? If you do, because like they tried this with with Dungeons and Dragons Beyond, D&D Beyond, they tried to monetize it really, in some arguments, quite an effective way, right? They were trying to maximize, they were trying to create recurrent revenue streams by selling digital items, going all in on those transactions. And the community, I think, collectively pretty much boycotted it. Now, I think a lot of that is down to also how the virtual tabletop system was mismanaged. I think that there was like a lot of corporate fuckery going on there that ended up screwing it. And there is a world where Hasbro come out with a virtual tabletop system and lots of microtransactions in it. And I'm not entirely sure that the community would collectively say no to that. I think that there would be a lot of people who would be up for like, well, it's only cosmetic, so I'll buy it. It's only cosmetic. Who cares, right? And
if the system was good without the microtransactions and the microtransactions felt fun or cool to people, I think that you're right. There's a world where people would embrace it.
Yeah, and that scares me because I think that that's actually the antithesis of what role-playing games are. And I kind of resent... honestly, if you want my opinion, I think Hasbro should sell it. I think they should sell it to a company that wants to just make games with it. I think it should be a smaller company, a Paizo-sized company that would do a lot more with
a privately owned company.
Yeah, honestly, because every single time a company goes public and they have something that I love, They always destroy it. Every time it goes public, they always destroy it.
So the
you know?
monkey's paw is going to curl on you, Discourse, because the problem is when you own something that is a brand that is recognized as much as Dungeons and Dragons, it's kind of, in terms of like giving it to someone else, if you're trying to give it to a small company that loves it and just wants to do something small, it's almost like the white elephant in the sense that it is so big that the perceived value of it is so high that the only person in the room who can afford to buy it is actually like the big agglomerizer company like Tencent or something like that.
Oh.
Obviously, we know that time that Snow Leopard Financial, the AI thing, reported it off of a Roll for Combat stream, that wound up being a hilarious fake news of that actually happening. But in reality, those companies can afford to buy a brand that, especially given that Hasbro thinks of D&D as something that could be so valuable. There's no way they can let it go to. There's no small company that can afford to buy it and then just run it as a subsistence farming equivalent situation. And it's sad.
Yeah,
if it was anything except D&D, that maybe it could. Any other tabletop RPG, no matter how big, probably could have that happen to it.
Dungeons and Dragons is fun. It's kind of like a cursed object for corporations, isn't it? Yeah, it's like cursed. It's like, what do you do with this? Because the community are entirely creative. They just want to make their own. They just want to use it as a toolbox to create their own little sandboxes. So they're not going to buy your plushies or your main characters because they're too busy creating up their own little stuff. They're going to buy books occasionally, but they don't want to pay too much money for it. And there's no recurrent revenue at all. They can just borrow each other's books, like in the library and stuff.
Yeah.
But everyone talks
Toxic
about
Crumble
it,
in chat. Toxic Crumble in chat says, I just got here. What's the controversy? I'm so sorry. The controversy is that Steven made that the title of the stream.
The controversy
we had a
is
big
that
controversy.
there is no controversy. That's the controversy. We had a discussion about the big controversy is there is no controversy.
Yeah, so you can take that up with Steven next week when he's back.
Yeah, well, I'll laugh at him because somehow next week's title, I'm sure, is going to have even more of the word controversy in it, and then it's just going to escalate. So next week will be the controversy about the controversy about D&D, and then after that, the controversy about the controversy about the controversy.
Yeah. I think that the Wizards of the Coast and D&D have a lot more that they could be learning from Disney, and not just in the parks way, not just because I think there should be a theme park, but I think they have a lot more to learn and in common with Disney than they do with Games Workshop, because Disney is another company that is obsessed with their legacy and with preserving Walt Disney as not a shithead. Right? And D&D has the same, like, the legacy of D&D has to be pristine, non-controversial Gary Gygax, can't be having problematic Garys, you know?
So are you saying they should take more cues from
Disney
Disney on legacy and have like certain old D&D things come out of the box, out of the vault for a little while, then put it back into the vault?
Yeah, I think that they should be discussing when they bring some of their like classic settings or classic monsters with that kind of out of the vault language. Yeah.
I think though, like, it's interesting because in a lot of ways Disney is an IP company, and I suspect that Hasbro want to be an IP company, right? They just want to license it out, make infinite money glitch, and just for no work at all. And it doesn't work because every single time they try to step outside of the wheelhouse, they learn that actually everyone's heard of Dungeons and Dragons, but it's not particularly appealing, I think, to a sort of mainstream audience. You know, you need to have it conjoined in with something else as well, like Stranger Things, right? It was Spielberg nostalgia. Oh, and Dungeons and Dragons, and
and it had main characters. That was that was clutch, which you brought up earlier. That's just the killer when they try to license out the IP, is that they do not have, even if they make them now, they do, and even if they think they have them with some of these characters that the really informed people know the names of, like when you put like Venger on it or Venger, I can never remember how it's pronounced, and people are like, okay, I know who that is. We're really deep into it. We know who that is, but it's not the same as when you bring back some of these other 80s nostalgia or 90s nostalgia character where it's like everybody knows who that is in the mainstream.
Okay, I'm gonna say something really controversial here, and I guess this is the D&D and Warhammer controversy. And okay, I'm sorry, but I actually don't think that any of the Dungeons and Dragons settings are particularly compelling, at least not when compared to Warhammer 40k. Warhammer 40k has a certain edge, and it has a kind of very teenage edgelord, like, oh, this is like dark and gritty vibe to it that's very compelling. It has a lot of perceived depth to it. It has a lot of interesting little interactions between different factions and things going on. And I've never gotten that from any Dungeons and Dragons setting. Dungeons and Dragons has always felt, no matter what setting it is, to an extent, there's some that are Dark Sun, etc., that have a little, but most settings, they just feel like generic fantasy. And that's by design in a lot of ways, because it's meant to be able to fit any table. You can just slot in your group into there and you can do generic fantasy stuff. And I think that's good. I think that's fine. But it's harder, I think, to create a really compelling, like to get people on board with a setting if they do not feel particularly compelled by it.
Just Planescape, go!
Does really well. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
okay,
I am a known...
Yeah.
I am a known Planescape super fan. But, okay, here's the thing about settings and D&D, though, is people love Baldur's Gate 3, and they do not give a shit whether or not it is Faerun, but they still love Baldur's Gate 3, even though it is Faerun. Being Faerun doesn't detract from Baldur's Gate 3. And people would go to my Sword Coast theme park to go to the places that you go to in Baldur's Gate 3.
Especially if the name of the theme park, instead of being Faerunland, was named Baldur's Gate. And there was a big gate.
Yeah.
And it was called Baldur's Gate, and it had people dressed up as the people from Baldur's Gate 3, and we forgot about the fact that it was actually supposed to be mostly about D&D, and we made it mostly about Baldur's Gate 3.
I think you would want to do the whole Sword Coast, and I think you would want Baldur's Gate to be one of the lands in your Sword Coast land. Like in the same way that Galaxy's Edge is one of the lands of the Disneyland park, Baldur's Gate would be one of the lands that you can go to within the...
Are you actually going to have like Am and some of the other places, maybe? Or is it just like Waterdeep, Baldur's Gate, and Neverwinter because they kind of had games about them?
Not all of them need to be cities. Some of them can be dungeon lands.
Okay, I like that.
Am's a country. Katla was the capital.
Yeah, okay, yes. Not all of them need to be civilization focused. Some of them can be dungeon focused because you have to put roller coasters
you need
in
dungeon
there.
stuff.
It's under mountain
land.
hunters.
Yeah. I think you hit on a really good point, though. Sorry to distract from the me and Dungeon Land conversation. I think you hit on a really good point, though. I don't think that Dungeons and Dragons, like if you slap Dungeons and Dragons on a video game or a movie, I don't think it sells it, right? But if that movie, that game is independently really good, it will get people therefore into the settings. Games Workshop that's how Warhammer has gotten so big. Video games. Space Marine 2 did really well, really successful, really presented the world and the universe in a very compelling way, created interesting characters for you to play. Dawn of War, like 20 years ago, but it was like one of the big waves of people who got into Warhammer on the back of this. Dawn of War presented the setting in a really compelling way, it got people interested in it, and it grew from there. With Dungeons and Dragons, I think that outside of Baldur's Gate 3, it's missing something that presents the world really interestingly. It doesn't matter what setting. And honestly, they should probably focus on a setting. I know they kind of switch from edition to edition. They go to different ones. And I like lots of settings. But they should focus on a setting and really try to push that as their main one. This is if they really wanted to sell like Dungeons and Dragons as an IP.
I mean, they've tried to do that over certain eras. They've tried to just be like, okay, we're only going to focus on one setting. Yeah. And that hasn't always necessarily been as successful for them. But I do think there's something to what you're saying, because Baldur's Gate 3 is not their only game they've had that has been compelling. But I feel like there was a giant gap between the era of like the old school D&D games that everybody knows and then Baldur's Gate 3, during which Warhammer was churning out dozens of games, not all of which were bangers. like the ones that you mentioned. Some of them were like okay. A decent number of them were highly rated, though, even ones that you didn't say that maybe weren't the most important for the setting. And if D&D had as many games as Warhammer did during that time, as many video games, maybe we'd be having a different story here.
I think in a lot of ways, though, like people don't feel like what they'll do is they'll just make a generic fantasy game, you know, like they'll do like a Kingdoms of Avalor and just be like, we're just gonna make it set it on our own in our own setting. That, by the way, we played Dungeons and Dragons in when I was a teenager because we created that. And we're gonna set it in my setting, said the lead writer. You know, so it's tough. They just they need to focus on quality and get really cool, awesome games. They need like a Space Marine 2, because I'm pretty sure that in the last like couple of years, Warhammer has had more people join the game, Warhammer, like more people playing, than the combined like 20 years previous. There's been more people getting into it now. Than the last, and that's because of there's been this critical mass building up from people getting interested in the lore from YouTube, like independently into lore and stuff. Like, I don't know how big the sort of lore is. There's not very many YouTube channels, for example, that do Dungeons and Dragons lore, like Forgotten Realms or whatever setting it is, right? Compare that to Warhammer. There's an entire genre of like lore videos for Warhammer 40K out there.
I think that's both because Warhammer has a lot of lore, and also because if you're not playing the Warhammer game and you're not immersed in the books, there's like a history of lore that becomes difficult to delve yourself as an individual. And so the niche for Warhammer lore videos is there for people who are interested in the lore but don't have the time and ability to delve through the different editions to find it. Whereas the lore of like Faerun doesn't have that problem. I feel like the lore of Faerun is more accessible.
You also kind of need a hook to make lore videos work, because I don't know the Warhammer tuber community as well as I do the D&D tuber community. But what I've seen for people who have expressed their lore videos that did well, it was because they had a really neat hook. Like, so for example, here's an obvious layup, and it did do well, which is Vecna was a villain in that was in Stranger Things, so they made a Vecna lore video about all the lore of Vecna from D&D. It's like, who is this guy actually? And then they put the Vecna from Stranger Things and the Vecna from D&D on it, and it's like, which is like with thumbs or titles like, which is like the better Vecna, a version of Vecna. And that did well, but Warhammer maybe intrinsically creates those moments more by creating new editions and new incarnations of these unique characters, so it always calls back to its past on a more regular basis.
And there's also lots of factions and named people to do videos on, like you've got Vecna for D&D, but what else do you have, you know? Like, what other organizations?
So Thirsty in chat said on the topic of my theme park that Castle Ravenloft should be a place in my theme park, otherwise missed opportunity. I agree completely, and furthermore, Strahd is another figure that basically everybody knows. Everybody's heard of Castle Ravenloft, and not only would Castle Ravenloft be a banger dark ride, but you could be making like a Ravenloft Strahd movie that would functionally be a D&D movie, because this is a D&D thing, but like that is an IP that they own and they're not using.
Yeah. Why isn't that? Yeah, I'm actually surprised at that. There's nothing on Netflix or anything. You know, like not even an anime.
Yeah, you know,
what's going on? Yeah.
They've had ones for like Castlevania and other things. The people who make those kind of animated films for Netflix, I feel like could do something with Strahd. Strahd is admittedly, like, other than the D&D, sort of like the D&D gravitas from him being in Ravenloft and then in Castle Ravenloft, he is kind of like a Dracula clone-ish vampire who's not like intrinsically, to me, as interesting as even some of D&D's other famous characters. But his adventures and the things that he's been in have just been good. And so therefore he's famous for that reason.
Strahd is also like the ideal of nostalgia bait for what D&D owns, because there have been Castle Ravenloft adventures and Strahd adventures across the editions, and so people have gone to Castle Ravenloft so many times throughout playing D&D they can buy the new Ravenloft Strahd adventure now and play that and remember back to, oh yeah, when I first got into D&D, we went to Castle Ravenloft too, and that's how this campaign went, and this campaign went that way. And
You know, it's funny that you say that, Jess, and it ties into two things that one thing that each of you brought up earlier in the episode. You say it's the ideal of nostalgia bait, but it's also kind of like, you could think of it almost as one of the major origins of 5e's nostalgia bait, is that Curse of Strahd sold really well compared to some of their other adventures, and then suddenly there was way more nostalgia bait in other things that didn't reproduce Curse of Strahd's success, but they were just like, well, it must have been the fact that it was from previous editions that made it do well, or at least it seemed that way. Obviously, we don't know what was going on in their heads, but after it didn't do great at its launch, but it then ballooned up later on. If you look at like some of the numbers that are publicly available, and it became a phenomenon. And then at about that point, just there started being a lot of nostalgia. But here's the question, which is, why did it become great later on? Even though the nostalgia of the name of Strahd, you would think if that was the real reason that it sold, that it would sell right at the beginning. It's back to what Discourse said about making a good book. It was good, or at least at least for some people who didn't like any of the adventures back then, they said it was at least better than the other ones. And some people like me thought, you know, it's a good adventure. And so when people ask, what should I run? People will be like, well, don't run any of the other ones for sure. But Curse of Strahd, go to this go to this subreddit. We have like, you know, there's these 12 threads that you should read that between them have about 100 or 200 tweaks to make it into this outrageously amazing campaign. And even if you don't do that, it's a pretty good adventure, and there's a big community that's built up over it. It was a good product, and that's what led to the success, not the nostalgia bait in that case, in my opinion at least.
Yeah, I think that book turned out so good because there were people working on it who felt passionately about the material. And so instead of it seems to me from outside of the company that leadership saw people completing a book that they felt passionately about and really put themselves into because they themselves personally had like nostalgia for Ravenloft. They created this, and then leadership's lesson was, oh, we should pull from older settings instead of, oh, we should let our employees do the things that they care about.
Yeah. We should let our creatives, you know, create stuff that
creative.
they're passionate about. Yeah.
To be fair to them, which I rarely necessarily want to be, because they are the executives and they have all the power and they don't need someone to be fair to them. That's what people are more than fair to them on a daily basis. However, I would argue that it's possible that they considered that option and they decided, hey, let's let people make whatever kind of adventure that they want to make. And that is part of what allowed them to create something that was kind of as daring and interesting as, oh my gosh, now I am embarrassed. I'm blanking on the name. What was the planar adventure compilation?
The Yawning Portal.
No, it was a planar adventure compilation in
The
5e.
box?
What?
Oh, the Infinite Staircase one?
No, not that one. That one's more recent. It was the one that was like
the one in
it
the
was a
Planescape
hub
box
place that was
set,
not Sigil, and it.
Oh, Radiant Citadel.
Yes, Radiant Citadel.
Oh, the
Gosh.
Radiant Citadel.
That's probably the fact that they may have considered that and be like, Radiant Citadel felt like that kind of passion project that the people wanted to make who were at the company, and I thought it was great. But the sales of it were not as good, so the executives might have been like, we only care about sales, and you said we would get sales like we did with Strahd when we let you make something that you were really excited about. That didn't seem to be the case for this one that didn't have any nostalgia to it.
I think the difference is that as far as I'm aware, there was no compelling villain to Yawning Citadel, right? Apart from
Radiant Citadel.
Or the Radiant Citadel. Apart from the Radiant Citadel, from what I understand, like they read your mind when you try to enter it. I don't know. That was a weird book. Where Strahd is a compelling character. He's a compelling character that people are like, oh yeah, I want to fight Strahd, right? It gives players like a memorable experience. It's a really strong hook. It's the clickbait. Yeah. It's like there's a guy, you're gonna fight the guy. It's gonna be really awesome, and they got it. They delivered in that case.
Yes, and the Strahd adventure also benefits, like A trickle-down benefit of having the strong villain of Strahd is that now people want to play this pre-written adventure so that they can have the same experience as their friends who have fought Strahd, and then they can all talk about how did your playthrough of fighting Strahd go, in the same way that you talk about how did your Baldur's Gate playthrough go. Who did you romance in Baldur's Gate? What decision in this decision tree did you make in Baldur's Gate? People have that comparative experience with the Strahd adventure, I think.
It creates a cultural touchstone for everyone to have that they can they can go back to, and they can it's the foundation of a community that way, whenever everyone can kind of refer back and say, what did you do at the, oh, my players went to the windmill, you know, like you can have all these little interesting stories that happen from that, which is the value, by the way, I think of having these pre-written adventures. I think that's what's really cool about it, is that you can create this shared history among players that even if, like, I would do Strahd, but I would set it in my homebrew setting, you know, but I would throw Strahd in and do that. Especially it was kind of convenient because it's like a little pocket dimension that you can kind of insert into any world, really.
So here's a weird theory that I'm going to posit. I don't really believe it. I'm putting some of these out here just to see what you guys say about it, based on comments and ideas that you've had tried to synthesize them. I'm not even sure it's a joke. I'm quasi serious. I'm cogitating on this, which is a lot of these tabletop RPGs have just a ton of adventures that come out. Like Pathfinder has a lot of them. D&D usually has a lot of them. My theory is, if you look at what the timing of, like, sort of the renaissance of 5th edition when it blew up, and it was partially the pandemic, maybe partially Critical Role, certainly Stranger Things had to do something to do with it. Maybe one of the things that actually helped it at that time, is that most of their adventures were panned by people except for Strahd. And Strahd was considered on so much of a higher level than the other ones that it funneled people into Strahd, thus artificially creating this shared experience and building a stronger community than they would have had if they had, let's say, 20 highly rated adventures that everybody liked when those new people were coming in, and what do you play? And then you see people on the street being like, I say Strahd, I say this one, I say that one. Maybe it helped them build a community to only have one adventure that was considered so highly compared to the others by... I'm not saying the other adventures were badly written or that they weren't good adventures. I'm talking about the perception of the community. What do you guys think about this this theory here?
I like it.
I don't know. I think personally that Strahd was just an exceptional adventure for a lot of people. I think that it had a really strong hook. I think it came at the right time. I think that it also had this kind of gothy feel that set it apart from the rest of kind of high fantasy adventure that all the other, you know, like you had Tiamat and stuff. And I honestly, I can't even remember what other adventures were out at the time. But Strahd felt different. It felt like it was its own different thing. And it was a good, strong, big, bad, evil guy that you could insert into your game and have the players just deal with him. And it wouldn't upset the cosmology or the setting of your own homebrew setting or whatever it was that you were trying to do. And I also think it made for a good introduction as well, because it had a little bit of sandboxy elements to it, right? Like Curse of Strahd had a little bit of a, you can go around and explore at your own pace. Strahd gets in your face very early on. He goes, okay, look, I'm a baddie. Here we go. Let's do this. We're going to be antagonistic towards one another. And so you get a lot of, you know, face time with him. A lot of these other games, a lot of these other adventures, it's like, oh, there's this general threat in the distance, you know, you're not even sure that you're in that, like, fighting that person until midway through the campaign or whatever. So I think Strahd just happened to be really good. But in terms of being successful, I think that, again, it's whenever you have these adventures that are tied to big names, really seem to be, you've got Strahd, you've got Vecna as well. Vecna seems to always be really interesting to a lot of people. And
but
it's
the
kind
new
of funny
Vecna adventure didn't help them as much. Do you think that's because he wasn't as front and center? He only comes in right at the end after you did all of the other stuff?
It was like trying to do too much stuff, I think. It wasn't like a Vecna. It was like the multiverse, right? It was trying to be like... I think that's a really neat... I don't think a lot of people want to do multiverse stuff.
That
honestly.
was kind of the conclusion we had when Linda, Steven, and I were on it, is that Steven was going through bit by bit, and Steven had, like, really deeply read it and was emoting about it, and we discovered that he individually either liked or loved the majority of the sub adventures that were in it, while still getting a bad feeling about the overall thing because of the connective tissue and because it had so many masters, it was pulling him in so many directions. So
Yeah.
I still think it's a good product to buy because you can pull out those like it and love it mini adventures and use them at the very least.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that because actually, the One Ring RPG does this really well, where they literally will release kind of like setting books, for a certain part of Middle Earth, and they won't do adventures. What they'll do is these things called landmarks, which is this: there's this location, there's this stuff going on here. Here's some rumors about it. Here's some potential like reasons why your players might go into it. Here's some reasons why, like, Bilbo or like Elrond or whatever might have interest in this area if the players are ever bumping or talking into him, right? And it kind of gives you all the tools to add it into an existing game, into an existing like framework that you've already got going. And I think that's really cool. But I think it's harder than just going, here's the book, go from start to end, run your players through this. Here's a series of encounters. That's easier to like work with for a lot of people, especially I think that novice DMs, people who are newer to running games, think that it will be easier just to have like an on rail, like a not on rails, but like a guided experience. Whereas I actually think that I think that we agree on this, Mark, that taking what works for you out of these kind of adventure paths and just taking like, okay, I like this thread, I'm going to take this thread and just use that is actually much better. It's kind of what I want from a book, but I don't think that most people do. I think that most people just want like a very direct, very clean sort of adventure path.
I think they at least want to feel like, for most people, like what they're doing is tweaking a clean vision rather, because they feel a little lost when they realize that it's this big giant space of whatever they want and they can pull whatever they want. Because a lot of people were willing to take the effort to go online and read what the community was saying about adjusting Strahd, because you could get it from a strong adventure on its own to like a fantastic experience with the right community guidance. And that feels safer to a lot of people because you're not painting by numbers, but you're still painting within the lines at that point. Whereas when you realize you can go past the lines and go anywhere, then you're like, well, what do I do for some people? And you and I, and a lot of the people really into it, we're like, yes, this is ultimate freedom. But for some people, that means this is, I'm lost. Where is my guiding lines?
The job of a pre-written adventure is to be an instruction manual for the game master of like, if I'm the adventure author, I'm writing an instruction manual of how to create an experience for your table where you are running my adventure.
Yeah. I don't want to be mean or anything. Like I think that there's been a lot of great work that's come out of Wizard of the Coast for 5th edition and for 5.5 edition. But I think that there hasn't been truly, aside from a couple like Strahd, that have been really great adventures where people want to talk about them and they're like, you have to experience this. There's this moment where your players will encounter this thing and you will never guess what they like. It's crazy, and it changes everything. And I've heard a lot of complaints about a lot of the books, but I haven't heard very many people like go talk about really compelling adventures that makes people want to buy them. Strahd's one of them. Strahd is one of them where people do talk about it a lot. So I think they need to get a banger. There's been no bangers, not in a while.
Well, there is, in my opinion, a mismatch of the word count that they are afforded for an adventure book versus the scope of what they want to cover. And it makes it so they're not actually able to successfully deliver on the experience that they've set out to create because there's simply not space in the adventure format that they're using.
That was a huge thing when we were talking about the Vecna book that Linda and I brought up constantly during that episode. When Steven was like, couldn't it have had this additional amount of connective tissue or this other thing? And then we were like, Steven, with you as a publisher who will constantly add pages to the book to allow it to be a better adventure, sure. But look at how much the higher-ups were forcing them to put into this adventure. Forcing this all-star list of authors, which if you look at the authors of the Vecna book, it has like some of the best adventure authors of like the modern era were among the authors of some of those mini adventures. But they asked them to go to all of these different worlds, and it also had to have Vecna, and I need to have all of these things. And they only gave, and it had a big bestiary at the end that used up a bunch of the pages and all these other things. And what you had left was just like, it was extremely ambitious is like too weak a word to say for like
Yeah.
what they were attempting to do. Like as the director of game design for RFC and having worked at Paizo, like I would never attempt to fit that much in there. And given how many pages they have, I think they actually, like, it's impressive what they did put in there, but they should have been given twice as many pages as that if they needed to fill that much stuff, or they should have been allowed to say, we're sorry, we can't fulfill all of these requirements. Maybe let's make it 2 products.
Yeah. And it does hurt them because there's been some books that have just felt weird. Like the pacing on them is odd. And yeah, and I wonder if that's why. I'd never really connected that before.
Adventures are very difficult to if you don't have a sufficient amount of space to fit the adventure in, it's very difficult to write an adventure that feels to the reader like everything in it is connected. It's much easier if you have a limited amount of space to write a bunch of vignettes that then the game master connects themselves. But if you sell that as an adventure product, people are going to take that and say, these aren't connected. What do I even do with this?
Yeah. See, it's kind of funny because I think that for certain games this works well in, like Delta Green, for example. There's a lot of kind of anthology books almost because the structure of the game is set up that, you know, every 5 years you have this strange case. You're playing like CIA agents or whatever, like investigating the supernatural. Every so often, every 5 years, you'll have this strange case. And then there's like years go by. You do some rolls to see what happens to your character in between that time, and then you go into the next one. And that kind of works in these kind of anthology ones. But with Dungeons and Dragons, I think people want they want to level up from 1 to 20, right? They have this, and they want to do that perhaps in part of a lengthy kind of shared narrative. So it's harder to get the vignettes to sort of work in that sense for like Dungeons and Dragons. And I imagine similar for Pathfinder.
I think the amount of connective tissue people need is also very different. People who are just into the one-page OSR style adventures that just kind of give you the bullet points, Cliff's Notes, and then you come up with the rest of it. They're like, what are people even doing with adventures of this leg? One of the problems for some of the 5e adventures in that regard is that they kind of were like the halfway mark between that and the fully specified adventures. And I sometimes call this the unhappy medium, where you didn't make the people happy who wanted it to be just bullet points so that they could do it themselves, and you didn't make the people happy who wanted everything to be completely specified so that they didn't have to figure things out. And so therefore you made no one happy by going in between. But sometimes it can be really hard to fit everything that you need to make the people who want the specifics happy. To give a recent example, we made an adventure that was free for people who like backed in a certain way our Year of Titans, called Release the Kraken, that Linda Zayas Palmer wrote. And we gave it to playtesters. In order to put in enough connective information, which I added to the adventure at the playtester's request, when they're like, well, we don't quite understand this NPC's motivation. Could you add a Q&A like Linda did for some of the other NPCs too? And eventually that got added to like every major NPC that they met, because they're like, we really like these Q&As. They really make us feel the personality and the voice of the characters and what they're doing. And we added those. We explained other things. By the time it was done, this adventure, which is like barely 1 level, character level worth of content, is now as long as a Paizo Adventure Path volume. Except for the Paizo Adventure Path volumes also have back matter, and I'm including the words that were in the back matter.
Also, Mark, you already know this. Only Steven would make an adventure a free bonus. That's the most unhinged thing in TTRPG publishing.
Wait, hold on, Jess. Do you know what Steven is making the free bonus next? It's more unhinged. Although it's less unhinged from the perspective of our workflow perspective, it's more unhinged from money. Do you know what his next free incentive is? This is a great ad for people.
Book.
So you should go to
$1 book.
Go to EldermonLegends.com to get Steven's even more unhinged free thing, which is, it is pre-order Eldemon Legends for $1. This is going to be a Kickstarter that's like $60 Kickstarter for this giant Eldemon Legends project, right? That you get next year. That's great. And he's throwing in a $90 special edition of the original Eldemon plus free PDFs and other things as a $1 pre-order incentive. Like,
Yeah.
this is like the riskiest pre-order incentive that he's done, because if it doesn't work, like, he's in for these $90 books for everybody who pre-ordered for it.
Yeah. Okay, so that is wild.
But in a different way.
way. It's wild in a different way, and I personally have less of a reaction to it, because you're not setting yourself up for like, yes, for free I will write an adventure and create an adventure and publish an adventure that is up to Stephen Glicker adventure standards, which people think that when they're buying a D&D adventure, they are buying an adventure that has all of the bells and whistles that Stephen is unhingedly putting into adventures. Stephen is the only person who does this to adventures, just because it makes like no sense in the scope of the realities of TTRPG game design, writing, and publishing. Like there is a reason every other company has decided not to make adventures as long and as detailed as he does, and it's because it's a mistake. Like, it makes the buyer happy that they are getting this much value and they're getting an adventure with this much connective tissue.
It's a mistake in your favor, buyer.
It's a mistake in the buyer's favor. It's a mistake because it just makes the adventure so massive and it takes so long to produce and it's so much work that like the juice is not worth the squeeze. But that kind of high production value is what people expect out of Wizards of the Coast because they are the market leader. And the fact that they're not doing that, because it's a mistake, but the fact that they're not doing that makes all D&D adventures be perceived disfavorably.
I see what you're saying there. Only a passion project can actually put that much in.
Yeah. So, okay, if Hasbro, so we accept evil Hasbro, okay? We're like, okay, it's evil Hasbro now. It's Two-Faced, they flip the coin. It's on the Scarred side.
Yes.
Should they be selling, like, bundle boxes that come with miniatures inside them with the adventure? Like, should they be selling, like, those starter set kits, but instead of all the tokens, they have miniatures?
Well,
well.
we're talking about evil
way.
Hasbro, right? So I'm
Yeah.
going to answer your question not with a yes or a no, but with it's a limited edition.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. It's a bundle.
And this is the only way you should be selling adventures. Turning an adventure into a board game and charging board game prices for it is truly the only way you should be selling an adventure, and the adventure should be stripped back in scope so that it is board game night length.
Yeah, boy, I really.
And
hope
then you
that-
have to, and then you have to buy another limited edition supplement every. Yes, you are insane, Stephen.
In a good way for the fans.
But I really hope
You are
that Chris
mentally
Cox isn't
unwell.
listening to this video.
What?
I really hope Chris Cox is not listening to this video. He is picking up some bad tips, some good bad tips. No,
And so
limited edition bundles.
Yeah, limited edition supplements to the limited edition bundle. And the limited edition bundle is re-released every 3 months to a different first level adventure.
Yeah. And they should
And you have to buy the entire board game again if you want the new first level adventure.
Do they still sell novels? Like, they should be doing more novels, right? Like, they should be doing more named character novels.
I don't know if those are profitable. Maybe. But I don't
It
know if
used to
those are
be-
profitable.
It used to be 40% of their income back in 2014.
Yeah.
Or, sorry, gross revenue for D&D was coming from the novels and e-novels. Because the numbers got leaked, by the way. Watch my latest video. So yeah, a bunch of the last 18 years of internal Dungeons and Dragons data all got leaked. FYI, just check out my video. Plug. But yes, so they used to make quite a bit of money on it, but now it's like 1%, 2%. So it's a very tiny amount. They should probably be doing that, because like that's where Warhammer, a lot of its IP strength comes from, is selling novels to people.
Yeah.
But I guess one of the things that I think that Warhammer has that Dungeons and Dragons don't have is that you can walk into a Games Workshop store. Firstly, they've got stores, they got a retail presence, but you can walk into a Games Workshop store and you can look on the shelves. And on the shelves, you can see these like really iconic looking things. You can see different army books with beautiful art on the front of them. You can see miniatures that all look distinct, and it's really compelling to look at that. With Dungeons and Dragons, it used to be impossible to say what you did in Dungeons and Dragons. It took you to go to a game and to play it. That's why Critical Role, that's why actual plays were so important, because you could actually see what a game was, right? And that's why there was this massive boost. But if there was a way to kind of bottle that in some way to make these, I always think that Dungeons and Dragons is really missing compelling factions, compelling characters in it. I really do.
They
So if they sold more novels,
They need to
Yeah.
stop selling all of their novels for about a year so that they can pull Dritz out of the vault.
yeah. do some animations, you know? Get some
then-
animations going.
After Dritz comes out of the vault, he goes back in the vault and Elminster comes out of the vault.
Limited edition VHS sales.
Exactly. They all have limited edition covers that you can only get
Yeah.
during this like 3-month period where Dritz is out of the vault.
Yeah.
That's
the
right.
pin.
Or get this Legend of Drist limited edition miniatures box that has all the
Yeah.
Drist
Yeah.
characters. You'll never be able
Make
to
it
get it
blind
again.
boxes. Why
And a
not? Just
cloth
make it
map.
blind boxes. Yep. Cloth map. Yep.
Make a Drist Lego set like the new Pokemon $500.
Oh god, I
Lego
saw
set.
that. Holy heck. Did you guys see that? What the
No, I didn't see it. I was just referencing it, and I happened to pull a rough amount of money out of my head, just
No,
like
it's
Athena
one of-
emerging from Zeus.
you knew it. Well, you underwrote it. It was $650.
Ah, yeah, you're right. See?
Because it was one of those ones where I saw it and I was like,
My
well,
head
I
was
saw,
so
okay,
broken
new
by
Lego
it
sets.
that I got the wrong amount.
Yeah. New Pokemon Lego sets. And I thought to myself, those are going to be expensive. And then I could not be prepared for how expensive they were.
So, V's Wiki gave a super chat that said, I'd be more interested if WotC created a compelling new setting, something that really hasn't been done in the modern era. I'm going to posit that at the very least, WotC thinks that would be a devastating mistake, and that they might actually be right. Because of the fact that splitting their base up among various different settings has hurt them in the past. And if they had to create a new one now, it doesn't have any of the nostalgia pull for the people who do get nostalgia pulled, which we've determined is not necessarily a ton, but it is some people who can become a core. And it may be a mistake today. Maybe it won't be a mistake 30 years from now. If they created a new setting with, like, evil, and I don't mean, like, the alignment evil. I mean, like, sort of corporate evil in mind, where they were like, this new setting is based on ideas that will later easily translate into important characters, loot boxes, and sort of, like, nostalgia bait 30 years from now. We're sort of, like, you know, baiting the water for future Hasbro.
It's interesting that because I don't disagree that creating a new setting is probably a bad idea, but it is interesting how new compared to the other settings Eberron is.
That's true.
And is Eberron actually, like, I like Eberron, and there are people who like Eberron, and they really went in on Eberron in 4th edition, but I wonder if Eberron has stuck around in the same way that some of the other classic, like, Greyhawk and Forgotten Realms have, or if Eberron has just kind of disappeared because it didn't latch when there were so many legacy settings for it to compete with.
So here's my theory, and it is not based on having, like, gone out and canvassed everyone, but just based on the vibes that I feel from the people that I've talked to. So it's anecdotally biased, which is that Eberron is not even close to being able to beat out Forgotten Realms, the setting that was pushed as the one true setting for multiple editions. Greyhawk, the Grognardy setting that Grognard's like the most. But that Eberron has the stick-to-itiveness to have beaten out is generally feels like it is currently still more popular than, like, Mystara.
Yeah.
Right? Or some of those other settings that are not, like, you named Greyhawk and Forgotten Realm. Those are the big dogs. You're not going to be beating those. And that's pretty impressive given that it's newer. But I do think it had the advantage of there's that open call for settings that in 3rd edition, and there was some excitement around that and its launch. And it was a very well-made setting back then. And like you said, there were some pushes in 4th edition. But I think it is safely on a second tier of excitement below the big dog, but above like Mystara, for example, or Birthright. I know that Matt Colville loves Birthright, but is never been the most popular and never will be.
Matt Colville and Matt Colville alone.
I think there were some cool ideas in Birthright.
I'm not saying there's not cool ideas. I'm just saying that if you're gonna pull out of your back pocket, like, oh yeah, D&D settings, I really like Birthright. Most people have never heard of this setting.
I don't think I have. Honestly,
Yeah.
I think that the vast majority of D&D settings can kind of be, from a very casual outsider perspective, can be all conflated together into one just homogenous generic fantasy setting. I
Would you
think most
call
people
it the
would just read them.
multiverse?
Yeah, well, don't do that though. That's bad. And I think that's why people aren't into the setting as much. I honestly think that if there was one setting for Dungeons and Dragons that I would throw all my weight around, if I wanted to do like a TV show or a movie, or some sort of like other IP franchise thing, like a video game, I would do Planescape. I think Planescape has the most compelling visuals. It looks interesting and it feels like there's a lot of depth. It's like, I have no idea about this world. I can't even guess at what's going on here. I want to watch some lore videos on this, right? It feels like there's a lot going on under the surface, and that would be really compelling to a lot of people.
I love Planescape, and I would love to see that, but I do think that would be a mistake compared to Faerun. I don't
how
think
come?
that people, because I think Faerun is more accessible because it is generic fantasy and you don't actually have to watch the lore videos to understand what's going on, which is why so many people were able to play and enjoy Baldur's Gate, even though they could not possibly care less about Faerun. And once you are
Yeah.
hooked in, now that you are in the Baldur's Gate ecosystem and you are playing your Baldur's Gate, now you can move on to start reading the novels and exploring what the lore actually is. Whereas I do think that Planescape
See,
there would
but
just be so much.
I don't think that many people played Baldur's Gate 3 and then got into the Faerun setting.
Right,
Whereas
but they
I
also don't
suspect that,
need to.
yeah.
People
Yeah,
could
but that's the
watch
problem.
yeah,
That's the
but
problem.
people would watch and consume and enjoy a TV series that is set in Faerun without needing to actually understand anything about Faerun. Whereas I think that, have you watched like Canadian or specifically Quebecois film?
No.
Because it is
No, I
some
haven't.
wild and weird shit, and I think that would be the experience that people would have watching a Planescape TV series. I think that it would be too wacky for a lot of people.
I think it just depends on how you do it, right? So if you look
Yeah.
at the Space Marine 2 video game, for example, like that is Warhammer 40K as a setting is very abrasive. It's hard to get into. It's like very convoluted and complex. But that's kind of its appeal. And I think Planescape has a similar appeal in that if you're introduced to the setting from a point of view and you are slowly learn about this weird world that's very different, I think a lot of people would feel compelled to get into it. It's not going to be for everybody.
Yeah.
And but I think for the people that get into it, we create a very dedicated audience. And
Yeah.
I think it's a compelling setting. I think it has a really strong visual identity.
I love Planescape,
I do
but
think-
I agree
yeah.
that there is friction to get into. In fact, some of the original materials, which I enjoyed, but they had an intentionally almost gatekeepy element in the lore, not in the like actually trying to gatekeep the players in the real world, but like in world, where they were just like, oh yeah, you are a hero in your home world. Oh please, you're a clueless. That's what we call the people who aren't from around here. We're using all this slang that you don't know because you're clueless. You don't understand how things actually work. And here's all these factions. That's it. My favorite published D&D setting of all time. But it is fair to say that it was more difficult to get into it unless you were the kind of person who took that as a challenge. And we're like, oh yeah, I'm not going to be clueless. Let me sell you. Now I know this stuff.
Well, they should they should make it more accessible. Like there's a way to make it more accessible, I think. Because I do agree that Faerun, but the problem with Faerun is that you see it and you go, I don't need to know any more about this. I get it. It's like there's elves and stuff. Sure, why not?
So there was several super chats in a row. First, a Shandarite House said maybe WotC should do a series of books merch as a big year or 2 year long event for a multiverse planet war for the merging and survival of the settings, or to decide what survives like Secret Wars. So I think that will anger people just to... As a person who... I would say that one of the reasons, although not the only reason, that my group kind of split off during 4E time. We played some 4E, but we moved back to also playing third edition-ish games, and then Pathfinder was not even the 4E mechanical rules, but the spell plague and some of the like lore changes that were happening, where they would just be like, oh yeah, your favorite character that was not a fan favorite character like Driss that you probably thought was like, okay, great, everybody likes Driss, fine. That favorite character that you had just was died. In
Yeah,
fact,
and
they
also
were so
every-
unimportant that they died mainly in the background when we just killed off.
Yeah.
They didn't even get a scene where they died.
Yeah. And every god is Grumsh now. Just all of them are Grumsh.
They're all Grumsh.
You thought this
That's
was a
it.
different god? No, you've been worshiping Grumsh this whole
It's
time.
it's all been Grumsh, and
all Grumsh.
you were interested in some of these wider pantheons. No, well, they all killed each other. There's only one left. It was too complicated.
Yeah. You thought Auril was a god? No, that's been the Queen of Air and Darkness this whole time.
All right, so there was another super chat from Knights of Less Cult that says Society of Sensate cutscene when.
I don't know what was censored.
I don't know. I'm thinking
was
it might have been
censored.
orgy.
Oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense. I understand. We
Make it happen.
also brushing past the orgy cutscene. Chaos Seagull, Mark, did you read this one? WotC needs to take their characters like Tasha and Mordenkainen and do what WotC does with Magic the Gathering to write books and comics for their Planeswalkers.
Oh yeah, I was going to, but then I got two more, and then my brain thought that had been all of them. But yes, that.
I
So
agree.
that is
I
something
agree
that's
with
similar
this.
to what we were saying earlier in the episode that would really help them.
There aren't a ton of characters, but there are some, and not all of them are named Melf. And they could be doing things with, like, more things with Tasha, and more things with Strahd, who everybody knows.
You could do a Strahd comic, absolutely.
Yeah.
He's basically just discount Dracula with certain other things that are changed to it, and everyone would like a Dracula comic if you made one. Add all the other D&D-isms, and you can have like a really interesting comic.
So
Vampire
where's his
comic.
story contained, though? It's like I think this is like the main problem they have with Warhammer. The story for the character, like the sort of like Primarchs and stuff, like in the setting. Firstly, you've got super special hero characters who are like really powerful. So and Dungeons and Dragons doesn't really have that as much. I don't know. Maybe some of the settings do, but their story is contained in novels, and there's a series of novels that will constantly be coming out, like updating the storyline. And where is that story located? Is it located in comics? Is it going to be like, are they going to do a TV? Like, where is
Have
it?
you
Like, where do
seen-
fans go to get it?
Have you seen... I haven't finished it, so I can't talk about the whole run of it, but have you seen the Freerin anime?
No, I haven't.
No, okay.
No.
I watched the first episode or two because everybody, like literally relatives, friends, everybody was just like, you have to watch this. It's the best. And then I was like,
So-
I was not that interested, and I stopped watching it. Sorry to everyone in chat who is all like, no, it's the best. I'm sure it's going to pop up, but...
Freerin is an elf who is very old, and she was part of an adventuring campaign, and all of her adventuring companions have died because they're not elves, but she's still alive, and she's reminiscing about their campaigns. And as she is going through her reminiscing journey, she takes on an apprentice. And I think that this is kind of the structure that you would want to use with someone like Tasha, where your point of view character is not necessarily Tasha, but someone who is taken on as Tasha's apprentice, who over the course of the story realizes who they are the apprentice of and what that means.
Yeah.
I could see that. And that way you're also introducing a new character that you can use for a variety of other things, but they're tied into the lore of the setting.
But interestingly, I don't think any of this enhances the RPG at all.
Not
This is why I
necessarily,
think Favorite,
but-
Favorite works really well, is because it is like, it's very accessible. It's kind of fantasy. You don't need to know a lot about it to go, all right, guys, we're going to play in this setting. I've got to run a game, and I'm going to make a dungeon. What will I put in my dungeon? Goblins exist, I think. So I'll put some goblins in there. Like, that's great for an RPG, but for like a compelling setting that makes people want to learn more about it, I don't know.
Yeah,
if it
it's the
necessarily is.
setting and the brand.
Two different things. Yeah.
The setting and the brand and we've been talking about that here. And to be honest, like they D&D has their new it's some kind of brand position. I can't remember what it is. Dan Ayub that a lot of people were talking about, that he was excited. He's talking to a lot of people. People had some buzz of what he's gonna do. But then we had an episode about this. It led to this outrageously, obviously wrong rumor that because of him, they're going to make a new edition when he's not the correct executive to make a new edition. He is the branding guy. He's going to do all the types of things we talked about during this episode. He's going to find those cool books, those cool comics, those cool movies, those cool TV shows. you know what? If people are excited, if the people he's talking to like what he's saying, maybe they're all gonna be good. But it doesn't mean that's not the person who makes the new game. And having
Yeah.
a good
Right.
person
He's gonna
in that
make my
spot
theme
could-
park.
Yeah, he might make your theme
Yes,
park. Having a good person in that spot could be amazing for the brand. You're right, Discourse, that doesn't directly enhance your game. But enhancing
Yeah,
the
well, it
brand and
does.
enhancing the story can enhance your game indirectly.
Exactly, because it gets more people into playing the game, so it
Right.
means your tables will always be full. There'll always be people who
Reed's
want to
law,
play. You'll get
Metcalf's
to- yeah.
law. The exponential
Yeah.
or quadratic growth of your ability to fill your tables and to have a strong community based on the size of the player base.
It's better for everybody if the game is as accessible as possible and everyone can play games. That's ultimately at the end of the day. I think I love RPGs. I think it's really cool, and I want as many people as possible to experience it and get a chance to experience it. Which is why they shouldn't copy Games Workshop, Stephen Glipker. They shouldn't copy Games
right.
Workshop because Games
That's
Workshop's very
right.
exclusive and gatekeepery, and the prices
They
are
should
too
copy
high.
Disney.
Yeah,
Yeah, there we go. So actually,
famously very good.
that would be an amazing like alternate title and thumbnail for this. Now that we had the discussion,
know.
which we needed to talk for 2 hours to get this
Yeah.
down, because
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah.
bottom line and the TLDR of this video could be D&D should not go down the path of Games Workshop. They should copy Disney instead.
No,
Yeah.
it should be positioned as like the thumbnail should have Discourse's face on one side with like Space Marines and the GW logo, and then me on the other side with like Lilo and Stitch and Disney, and then VS in the middle.
Well, no, because
Which way,
Discourse
D&D
also doesn't
man?
want them to go the Games Workshop one. Maybe if we were to take the exact thumb that's on there already, you just take the guy who's looking and you make that be D&D, and the one that he's looking at is Disney, and the one he's looking away from is Games Workshop.
Oh no, Steven says
Steven
D&D
says
should
D&D
just
should
be
just be bought out by
Disney.
Disney. See, Disney is another example of a company that could afford to do it because they're
They
very
would buy
rich.
D&D.
Yeah.
Let
If
me tell
they
you, I
did,
think that under
You know, listen.
Disney,
Yeah.
If they did, they
They
have
wouldn't-
a very viable theme park. And if they made the D&D land,
No.
it would be
It would be
probably like more like it would be like higher production value and
God,
higher
do-
cost
do you-
than
do you
if you
think
just
they
had
would
someone
do,
else
like-
do it.
do you think they would do like Sword Coast Land, or would they just do Dungeons and Dragons Land?
They would do
And it would
Dungeons
just
and
be-
Dragons land. Sword
and it
Coast
would
land
just
is too
be
nuanced.
generic.
It's too. They would be like Sword Coast land is
But-
too like huffing on your own
yeah.
thing because nobody
No,
knows
but
what
I mean,
it
like, would
is.
they do like a specific setting? Would they
Listen.
even care to do that? Would they do like
No,
any
listen.
setting, or would they just do Dungeons and Dragons, generic fantasy?
So we can make a very educated guess about what they would do because we know what they did with Star Wars.
That's
They
right.
invented a new planet called Batuu, and they set the canon of the Disney Star Wars land to be during the new trilogy instead of having any of the classic characters for anyone to meet. You cannot
Yeah.
go there and meet Luke Skywalker. You can only go there and meet Rey.
To be fair, though, do you think they would do that again? Because I feel like they anticipated that the new iteration of Star
Yeah.
Wars would be very successful, perhaps more successful than it has been. And so, if they were doing that again, maybe they would have
They-
went more legacy.
I don't think they would go just D&D. I think they
Yeah.
would pick a very specific place. And I think that specific place probably would be Baldur's Gate because Baldur's Gate has brand recognition
Yeah.
from the video game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. I think Baldur's Gate is the place.
And that's what I said
that's what
before.
they would do.
You build a giant
And
gate,
it would
even though
not-
actually, like,
yeah.
the gate of Baldur's Gate was not a very important thing to it necessarily. But that's okay because it has the word gate in it, and you write Baldur's Gate over it, and that's what gets you into the Baldur's Gate area. And it's got Asterion, it's got everybody from Baldur's Gate 3, maybe a few nods to Baldur's Gate 2 or 1. You know, you could have like some random crier who goes out who's hired by the park. The Lord of Murder shall perish, and in his death shall leave a score of mortal progeny. So saith the wise Alonso.
Yeah.
Who here has
Yes.
played Baldur's Gate 1?
A little bit. Okay, they would not make an entire theme park, though, is the problem. Maybe actually they would do Castle Ravenloft instead of
Yeah, maybe.
Baldur's Gate. That's a
Attach it to the
possibility, but
Haunted
they would not
Mansion.
They would not make an entire theme park. They would make it a subset of an existing theme park.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I don't even know. Maybe Hollywood Studios?
Oh, they could do like an Animal Kingdom section where like kobolds and stuff. Like they could just make them using
they
genetic
could potentially
testing.
do that, but they already have Avatar Navi land there.
Yeah.
The original plan for Animal Kingdom was to have like fantastical beasts, unicorn, and dragon land, but they ran out of budget and didn't build it.
That's right.
And so
I forgot about yeah.
and then that they used that piece of land to make Avatar Navi land.
So I need to interrogate something from Steven in chat for 1 second. Steven, you just said your neighbor designed Star Wars land and you could ask him.
I saw
but
that.
You've told me before that all of your neighbors are financiers who do not understand your hobbies or anything that you do at all. But if one of your neighbors designed Star Wars land, that sounds like a nerd who would understand sci-fi and fantasy. So which one of those is really true? Or when you said all your neighbors, did you just mean except the Star Wars land guy?
Checkmate, Steven, explain yourself.
Yeah.
Now, he'll explain that the Star Wars land guy was somehow a financier who also designed Star Wars land in his spare time. And still doesn't know what tabletop RPGs are.
Yeah, just did it on the on a weekend.
He's just like, yeah, you know what? That's my hobby is Star Wars land.
Yeah, it's my thing. I love the idea of a theme park for Dungeons and Dragons, though. Again, they should do it. They should do it like in a castle. They should do like they should set it in Europe, and just get that old school vibes.
I think that'd be cool. I'd go to that.
I think it would be better. Really cool. I think it would be better if Universal Studios built D&D land than Disney.
Yeah, I agree.
I honestly,
I agree.
I feel like the Universal Studios model is better and less overpriced at the same time. So yes, but Universal Studios, I don't think could afford to buy D&D to do that. Maybe they could make a deal to make D&D land, whereas Disney could just flat out buy.
Yes.
Yeah. D&D, so Disney would make a lot of money on Dungeons and Dragons. I think they would succeed in turning it into a quote unquote successful IP where Hasbro have failed. I think because they understand, they're an IP company. They understand how to turn something into a successful IP. There'd be plushies everywhere. There would be Lego sets. There would be absolutely everything, and they would be, they have a large audience of fans who will buy everything Disney,
and they would do the crossovers.
It would be, to be clear, disastrous for the hobby. It would be terrible.
Yeah,
but it would make their shareholders lots of money.
Oh yeah, it would be not great for the hobby. Yeah. But think of the crossovers though. You can have a Kingdom Hearts style Disney characters in Dungeons and Dragons. You can have Marvel and Star Wars characters in Dungeons and Dragons.
Chaos Seagull says replace Harry Potter world with D&D. I could not possibly agree more. Also, it drives me bonkers that there is not one single Harry Potter world in Universal Studios. There's like 3 of them. Universal Studios Orlando has 3 gates. There is Universal Studios Islands of Adventure and now Epic Universe, and all 3 of them have their own Harry Potter land. It's just like, for why? Why are there 3 of them? The Epic Universe one is like Harry Potter Paris. Why did you build this?
Oh, is that like the legend of oh god, what's his name? Johnny Depp or whatever?
The Fantastic Beasts or whatever. Yeah, I don't know why they had to make Harry Potter Paris. Like, you already have 2 Harry Potter lands. Just stop making them.
What other IPs do they have these days, I guess, right?
Well, so Epic Universe has How to Train Your Dragon Isle of Berk. It has Super Nintendo World. It has Universal Monsters, so like Frankenstein and stuff.
That's cool. That's sick. Yeah, that's awesome.
See, if they had D&D, they could add Strahd, and they could actually have Strahd versus Dracula, because if they have Dracula and Frankenstein for the Universal Monsters, and they could do a ride where Strahd is dueling Dracula, and you decide to see who wins between Strahd versus Dracula.
You could fight Frankenstein's monster in your like D&D game. Oh, what? There's so many cross-compatible. Synergies are happening all over the place. I'm loving this. Okay.
The Castle Frankenstein ride in Epic Universe is one of the 2 best rides in that entire park.
Okay, that's awesome.
It is.
I at Universal Studios in 2003, I think. So, yeah, I haven't I haven't been to one in a while, but
Yeah.
one day.
Epic Universe is new. It opened like late last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My
Apparently they're
dad
opening one in
went
the
to
UK,
Epic
actually, so-
Universe and like when it opened during like the special opening event thing. Like, did he bring my brother's kids, like his grandkids? No. Did he just did, and you could tell from looking at me how old my dad is, but
Yeah.
he was there.
Yeah.
And there was a special event
Yeah.
and he was there.
Is he a roller coaster hobbyist? Is he an enthusiast?
I would say my brother is
Yeah.
more a roller coaster hobbyist, but he loves theme parks. He loves Universal and those things, and he just wanted to go to it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, screw the kids. That's rocking. Forget about them.
You know what? I think it should be considered more socially acceptable for, just 70-year-old guy just go to a theme park for an opening.
The only reason I learned to drive was so that I could go to Tato Park, Ireland's only premier theme park, which is named after a brand of potato crisps that we have in Ireland. And they have a little potato-headed man as their logo. That's the only reason I learned to drive, to get to there.
You know, the funny thing is that
Yeah.
if just like some person who wasn't from Ireland told me, Ireland's only theme park is about a potatoes with a potato-headed thing, I would be like, I want to look that up because that sounds like I'm not sure if you're telling me a true fact or if you're like trying to make fun of Ireland.
One of its big attractions is that it has a petting zoo. You can go touch the goats, It's Ireland.
I've
We don't do things particularly big over here.
I've heard Knott's Berry Farm is banging.
It is actually.
I've heard
That's
that.
very far rocks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No. It. Yeah, I've heard that too.
All right. Do you guys think we covered the topic and the interesting side topics that came on afterwards?
If you're in the theme parks,
Yeah.
I think you got an episode.
I personally think we stayed remarkably on topic.
Yeah, surprisingly
Yeah.
so. Surprisingly so.
I
We
think there
really
were
did.
actually like zero tangents.
If we assume from the outset, which we kind of did, that the title and the thumbnail were just like kind of a canard, but that the topic was what was in the description, I think we stayed pretty on topic and we really talked about things.
Occasionally we got off topic. We didn't talk about the theme park stuff, but aside from that, I think we were pretty good.
The theme park was like, it was an evolution of the actual discussion, which is what can D&D do for do the bit?
I'm doing a bit.
Oh, okay.
My joke is that the topic was the theme park stuff.
Oh,
The
I see
off-topic
you're
was
saying that we
everything
sometimes
else.
moved off of the
That's
theme.
right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
You went over my head. You post-lawed me.
Yeah. I see someone saying there in chat that so much shit thrown at Steven this video. Yeah, you should do more videos without Steven.
Well,
everything can come out.
Honestly,
All the
though, if
criticism.
he's gonna get shade thrown at him, the idea of like you are just giving something that is such an amazing item to the consumer that it's insane that you gave it for free is like a kind of
That's pretty
shade
good
that is like also like when people ask you what is your weakness at your interview, and Steven's like, well, it's like we're gonna interview you, Steven, for D&D. He's like, well, my weakness is that I as a publisher, the thing that makes me, that people make fun of me of, and the weakness of this is that I sometimes put in too much effort and put out too deluxe of a product, and it's over more than what I promised people because it didn't go up to my standards to give them exactly what I promised them. I feel like you're on the right track if that is the thing that people are making fun of you for.
If you're ever in a job interview, your main weakness is that you're a perfectionist. Sometimes
but that's
you
become
spend
too much of a
time trying to get it over the
stereotype.
line.
I think people raise their eyebrows at that because it's become a stereotypical weakness, non-weakness. So I like it when people give different weaknesses, but that they can still put off into being a more positive thing. Like in a job I was at before,
Crack
there was one
cocaine,
guy who
my
said
big weakness.
Yeah.
he was like,
Yeah.
my weakness is that I'm lazy when it comes to doing things repetitively, and so I try to turn that into a strength because instead of just doing this thing 100 times, I'll write a script so that we could do it. It'll take about as long as doing it 10 times, and then it will do it for us forever after that, because I just don't want to have to do it again the other 90 times, and I think it's a waste of time. Which is,
Yeah.
you know, it is talking about a real weakness, which is laziness, but then is casting it as a positive.
Yeah.
I think that was
And then you didn't
better
hire
than
him.
just saying perfectionist, because that's so stereotypical now.
That you didn't hire him because you
Also-
need busy fuckers on the team. You're like, get out of here.
Thirsty says to have him on the stream and he'll talk about STLs and RPGs. Thirsty,
Okay.
I'll pencil you. I'll tell my employee Stephen Glicker here on the Roll for Combat
Yeah, I mean,
channel that
Steven
he
likes
has
having
you on.
Thirsty on here because Thirsty's just a very
Yeah.
engaging guest, and you two are also excellent guests. But Thirsty's an engaging guest, so we should have Thirsty talk about STLs and RPGs on a later episode. I think that'd be cool. Steven's like around, so he probably
Yeah.
saw this, and if he doesn't, we can just tell him.
Yeah.
All right.
Make
Well
it
then,
fun.
everyone, until next time, if you want to battle the zoo, you have to roll for combat? Take care, everyone. We'll see you then.